What if you were convinced that you knew more than anyone else? Because unlike you, they can't spot a lie. And yet, paradoxically, for the last 10 years, you have been the blindest of them all. Shortly after the call to the unknown person, the story begins with a tense situation. A police officer followed Chris Schaefer and said he was under arrest for planting a bomb at the Homestead Theater. The man continued to run and look around in bewilderment until he was told to tell them how to disarm him, and then perhaps they would take pity on him. The guy understood that he had to do something because he certainly wasn't going to give up. He soon stopped and reached into his pocket, asking if they all thought they could stop the ghost scythe. He started laughing and saying that they were all pathetic compared to them. Do they really value this city? Do they value their lives? Reaching for the grenade pin, he advised them to stand still, because one more step and they would die. One of the policemen immediately spotted the grenade and shouted, telling his men it was time to leave. But only one of them remained cool and remained calm while looking at the madman. At this time, panic began among all the police officers, and it was high time to run away. Just a few moments later, the grenade pin fell to the ground, and the villain threw the grenade forward. While all the people were running to safety, only one officer, namely that same girl, ran towards danger. The companion, seeing all this, began to scream in bewilderment and turned to the Sinclair officer, asking what she was doing at all. This same event was noticed by her friend, who approached a girl named Lauren and asked her not to do anything stupid. However, the girl did not care about the concerns of her colleagues, and she continued to run along the intended trajectory. Soon after, there was a bang, which was certainly surprising, since a grenade would have caused a bigger explosion. This is exactly what one of Lauren's acquaintances realized, because it was smoke, which meant it was a deceptive maneuver. But Lauren seemed to know it. At that moment, she effectively ran out of the smoke and headed after the suspect. At this time, the criminal tried to run away from the crime scene further and further, but already flying behind him was a Sinclair officer who was on his tail and had no intention of letting him go. The girl landed and hit him with all her might, causing the criminal to fall to the ground. The first thing the girl asked was a common question: red or blue? The criminal was initially confused and asked again. Sinclair wasn't going to argue with him for long, so she asked him a direct question: which wire should be cut? The guy was in no hurry to answer, which made the girl lose control, but she still started screaming and told him to talk. Otherwise the criminal realized that he shouldn't joke with this girl, so he said that he needed to cut the blue wire. Sinclair immediately transmitted this information by radio. The girl began to speak, and as a Sinclair officer, she conveyed that she had the suspect in her hands. The guy on the other end of the line asked which wire to cut, to which the girl calmly replied that the red wire needed to be cut. The criminal immediately tensed up. The sapper asked her in bewilderment if she was sure, since the lives of dozens of people would be at stake, to which Lauren assured him that this was the right wire. Although with little desire and trembling hands, the guy still reached for the red wire. After some time, information was transmitted from the bomb disposal unit, saying that the threat had been successfully neutralized. Shortly after the successful operation to apprehend the criminal, the guy approached Sinclair, saying that she scared them all, and even he, when she started running straight towards the grenade, thought that she. However, Lauren stopped him and said that everything was fine. She explained that the grenade had been modified. The lever was noticeably shorter than that of a regular grenade. The body of a grenade is usually a little longer for safety reasons, but for smoke grenades, it is shorter because it is not lethal. Shortly after explaining her actions, the girl began to turn around, telling Officer Harvey that it was time for her to go. The guy wanted to stop her, but she replied that she had some business at the station, so they would meet tomorrow. Harvey sighed heavily and was about to say something when he suddenly stopped and asked in bewilderment if the department was on the other side. Meanwhile, the girl walked and thought about the words of the criminal, who assured her to cut the blue cable. She was always able to recognize lies. As children, they were not taught to lie. They were taught that lying is bad. But the worst thing is that the truth can sometimes be much worse. The girl suddenly stopped and leaned over, hitting the wall with her hand. She tried to console her hysteria by telling herself that she had been able to prevent it. Through her tears, Lauren repeated several times that she had succeeded this time. But for someone like her, there are things she never wants to know. The action is transferred to the past, or to be more precise, to the railway station. That day, everything was calm. Trains were passing, people were waiting for their seats, and even the joyful cries of children spread throughout the station. But at one fine moment, all this was cut short by a loud and large explosion. Soon, the previously sunny and calm station was enveloped in a curtain of dark and gloomy smoke and blazing fire. After some time, the entire area was fenced off, and the police conducted their investigation. The crowds of people still remained in their places, where they said goodbye to their lives. But one guy stood out from all of them in that he was tied up and placed on a huge stick. On his chest was carved the inscription, "The revolution has begun," and below, there was a signature of who these words were from. They were from the previously mentioned organization, Ghost Scythe. And yet, our heroine soon came to her senses, realizing that she had to move on. And just at the very moment she came to her senses, her colleague came to her, who was addressing Lauren. The guy smiled and told her that she had definitely done well today. The girl was glad to hear the praise, which is why she smiled back and thanked him. And yet, without truth, the action takes us to the day of the disaster at the station. The girl ran as fast as she could, but with every step her running became slower and slower, and soon it came to the point that she stopped altogether. Then tears started rolling down her cheeks. She certainly didn't want to see what happened. Everything she revealed was not enough, and she knew it perfectly well. But what's more important is that she never thought she would team up with him to find the truth. The action takes us to a night where the residents of the house were not yet asleep, and at this time, one unknown guy wanted to take advantage of this. A moment later, a rustling sound came from the window. The girl turned her head instantly. However, having decided that she had imagined it, she decided to go further. And this was her mistake, because already at that moment, a hand was reaching out to her from the darkness. A few seconds later, the killer grabbed the girl and a muffled shot from a pistol was heard. A few moments later, the man who had been killed by the knife also fell to the ground. Once the revenge was accomplished, the guy said that this was the leader's best wishes. After the lynching, the unknown person placed a flower on the ground, which quickly turned blood red. But still, the action takes us to 7 o'clock, when the bright sun was still shining over the city. The action takes us to a cafe, which was quite lively. Each of the visitors was chatting about their own things. In this same cafe sat the previously known Lauren, who ignored everything that was said to her. Of course, she needed to listen to everything that was said to her, but still her focus was directed elsewhere. And yet, the interlocutor finally decided to ask Lauren if she was even listening to him. Just at that moment, the girl came to her senses and asked in bewilderment what had happened. The guy said that her eyes were always thoughtful, but he had to admit that he had never seen such a beautiful golden hue before. Lauren noticed that people always commented on her eyes when they noticed she was bored. The guy decided to assume that she had a lot of broken men's hearts on her account. Our heroine laughed and thanked Mr. Evans, but she seriously doubted it. Even if it was true, she must have been too busy working to notice. The guy smiled and said he understood her. His parents owned Evans, and he had to take over their business after them, so he worked hard not to disappoint them. And yet, all they care about now is that he is already 28 and not married yet, although more accurately, he is free. With a heavy sigh, our heroine realized that the conversation was most likely about this freak cheating on his wife. Suddenly, at that moment, a very familiar person began to walk past the window. Our heroine's eyes widened at that moment, and it was not even clear whether it was from happiness or from grief. One way or another, this man also began to turn his head, as if he felt someone's gaze on him. Soon their eyes met, and they looked at each other for some time. Suddenly, the girl's expression changed to a bright and wide smile. She immediately started waving and letting Lauren know it was really her. Of course, our heroine recognized her friend. Her name is Kim, and she appeared here at the right time. The girl tried to understand what was happening, while the guy was telling something fleetingly and meaninglessly. Now the conversation was about his respect for the police and the situation when some tramp pointed a gun at the cashier. He immediately threw himself between the woman and the criminal. Evans imagined it as something like instinct, but our heroine showed Kim, with her whole appearance, that she urgently needed saving. Understanding everything even without words, Kim accepted the order, because Lauren's desire is a command for her. At that moment, she suddenly closed her eyes, and a moment later opened them, as if she was about to release all her power. As a result, Kim pressed herself against the window with a bang and began to slowly but surely slide down it, causing a loud creaking sound. Lauren at this point screamed in bewilderment, saying that it was her blind friend. The girl jumped up and asked Mr. Evans for forgiveness, saying that she had to help her friend, but still she was pleased to meet him. But right before they left, the guy grabbed her hand and told her she couldn't just run away like that. He told her not to waste his time. At that moment, our heroine began to intercept the impudent guy's hand, saying that he was right, he really shouldn't have wasted his time on her, and maybe he should use it to actually help his company, or spend at least some time with his wife. The guy tensed up at that moment, but our heroine expressed her sympathy for the poor woman, for marrying such a vile and pathetic cheater like him. After letting him go, Lauren added that even if he was the epitome of human dishonor, she had still dedicated her life to protecting ungrateful cowards like him. She smiled and said it was something like instinct. Soon after, she wished him a nice evening. At this time, one of the cafe's visitors was watching the small drama that had taken place. Shortly after the girl left the establishment, he couldn't help but chuckle. And yet, as soon as the girl went outside, she turned to her friend. Grabbing Kim, Lauren said she couldn't afford to lose all her brains just yet. Anyway, the girl thanked her friend, because she almost died of boredom there. Kim laughed and said that next time she would bang her head against the glass herself. Lauren smiled and said that next time she would smash another guy's head against that same window. Kim was simply amazed at her friend's bad luck with all these weirdos. And yet she asked not to say that even this unfortunate man said how unique her eyes were. Lauren sighed and asked not to even talk about it. Her uncle, of course, told her that dating was a necessity to move on, but at that moment, our heroine's gaze turned to the little boy who was selling newspapers. The girls' eyes soon met, and their thoughts seemed to mature inside their heads. The reason for their silence was that the boy was selling a 5-cent newspaper with news of the Allendale Station tragedy 10 years later. Our heroine sighed heavily and told her friend that she was okay. Moreover, the girls soon approached the boy and bought the newspaper from him. The guy thanked them for purchasing his product, to which Lauren replied that this was a special thanks to him. Kim, at this point, knew she had to change the subject somehow. Her eyes darted around, and finally she had an idea. The girl simply grabbed her friend and asked Lauren to tell her more about her date again. Of course, this was the safest option. Our heroine laughed and said that she would tell her everything. Soon the action shifts to night. Our heroine's house was in darkness, and there was not a single light visible in the building. Lauren had just returned and was standing in front of the main door, opening it. Finally, quietly entering inside, our heroine wanted to go to her room, but something was clearly wrong. A moment later, the girl came face to face with the maid, who was also seriously scared, but still reacted and wished Lauren good night. However, she also noticed that she came back late today. Was it really back to work? Lauren smiled and replied that she even had a day off today. The maid was surprised and asked the lady if there was anything she could do for her. Lauren thanked Lucy, but she had some paperwork to catch up on, and she needed to sleep. The woman nodded her head and also said that her uncle was already asleep, but in any case, she wished Lauren good night. Walking down the corridor, our heroine was very glad that her uncle and everyone else were kind to her. He always treated her like his own daughter. What's more valuable to Lauren is that her uncle made her parents' absence more bearable. In any case, the girl soon approached her office and began to slowly turn the lock. A few moments later, our heroine entered the dark room and put the newspaper on the table. Soon after, the girl reached for the lamp and turned it on so she could at least see something. By starting to tie her hair, Lauren was signaling that she was in for a long night of work. The headline of the newspaper read, 10 years after the tragedy at Allendale Station. A memorial ceremony was held for the victims who fell into the hands of evil. The girl sat at the table trying to hold back her tears. 10 years had already passed, and should she really move on? But at that very moment, the girl suddenly grabbed the newspaper and threw it into the far drawer. She looked at him for some time with some hostility. She did not want to remember all these events, but everything happened by itself. However, soon the telephone rang, quite a helpful ringtone. Our heroine reacted to the call instantly, and therefore turned her head sharply. Shortly after, She picked up the phone, saying that a Sinclair officer was on the phone. The operator was telling her something. Suddenly, Lauren asked in confusion what kind of emergency had happened. As soon as the operator began to tell the details of the incident, the girl's face changed. After asking the street again, namely White River 45, she said that she would be there soon. As soon as the girl hung up, she reached into the lamp again and turned off the light. Soon after, she reached for her holster and placed the gun there, then put on her jacket. The final addition to her image, like any other officer, was a mask. In just a moment, the girl was collected, and then she went out and slammed the door behind her. And again, the room was lonely, and only the wind walked through it, opening one of the curtains. In front of us was a real board of inquiry into the tragedy at Allendale Station. But why was she here? The reason was that 10 years had passed, and Lauren still couldn't do anything for him. One way or another, after some time our heroine was running through dark alleys. The killers have been terrorizing the city of Ardalis for the past 10 years, and yet no one has ever seen their leader, even though everyone who is not lazy is among them. These people do whatever they want, believing that they will remain unpunished. Terrorists, thieves, murderers, all these people, if they can be called people, are called the Phantom Scythe. It was just that night that these people again reported another victim, which meant they had to act quickly. The action soon takes us to White River Street, where some officers have already gathered. Our heroine came a little closer and saw Kim and Will, whom she immediately greeted. The girl asked in surprise if they had been called in as backup too. By the way, Lauren Sinclair works in the patrol division of the 11th Precinct. At this point, Will also began to remove his mask, addressing Lauren. The guy smiled and assumed that they all lived close to the crime scene, and that's why they all called in. This is Lieutenant William Hawks. And then Sergeant Kim Liddell, who was familiar to us, started speaking from the same precinct. She couldn't believe that they were called on their day off. But what's even sadder is that it's all because of a murder, and only because it happened on their property. Will sighed, but said that no one knew the area better than them. So if the criminal is still here, they have a great chance of finding him. Kim replied that she knew it very well, and asked him to keep quiet. However, the lieutenant added that he was only told that a murder had taken place there, and the criminal had escaped. The night shift was occupied by an armed robbery at the other end of town. The guy also started talking about how Detective March should soon join them with reinforcements. At that very moment, the door swung open, and a girl in night clothes ran out. She immediately started screaming and asking for help. There was real fear in her eyes. The girl had no idea what had happened, which made it all the more frightening. The lieutenant asked her to try to calm down, because she was safe now. He consoled her, saying that she had done the right thing by calling them right away. The guy asked her to tell them what had happened, and to tell them where Miss Grayson was. Tears gathered in her eyes more and more, but she still tried to tell how it all happened. It all started with the fact that she had insomnia, and no matter how hard she tried, she could not fall asleep. Just as she was tossing and turning on her bed, she heard strange sounds coming from Lady Grayson's room. She wanted to make sure everything was okay, so she took the candle in her hands and went to the lady's room. But then she saw blood, and not just a little, but a huge amount. This seriously scared the girl, but soon she looked into the darkness and saw a limp hand sticking out of the doorway. And already at that moment, she could not restrain herself and simply ran away. The girl cried and said that she was very scared. However, as soon as the girl's story ended, the guy looked up and noticed a group of officers, meaning that their reinforcements had arrived. Detective Oliver March greeted Lieutenant Hawks and asked what was going on. William replied that he was glad to see the detective. The guy also said that they had been called about the murder of Lady Grayson. He pointed to the door and began to talk about how they were just about to search this house. However, at that very moment, a loud shot rang out and echoed past them. Kim was puzzled when she realized that the sound had come from right across the road. This was certainly not the most pleasant thing, so William asked Miss to go inside and stay away from the windows. Shortly after, the lieutenant approached the detective and asked him to take care of the witness, then called Lauren and Kim to follow him. In fact, that's what they did. The detective went to guard the witness, while the lieutenant's team and a couple of the detective's men ran towards the shots. Our heroine, as always, ran, but still looked around to assess the situation. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound, which, as it turned out, came from the roof. Raising her head, the girl really saw a black silhouette. The girl immediately pointed to the roof and said that someone had just escaped through the window. Hawks tried to stop Sinclair, but failed. Not the most pleasant, but Kim was still nearby, so he told them to follow him because someone might still be alive. Our heroine, meanwhile, ran as fast as she could, which is why she even managed to break away from her partners. Raising her head again, she continued to keep the criminal in sight. But this was not enough, so the girl sped up even more and headed towards the wall and jumped onto it. Lauren's physical fitness showed as she skillfully jumped across various ledges and balconies. Thanks to this, after just a few moments, she jumped onto the roof, where she could see the criminal right in front of her. And yet the guy was too fast. It was definitely impossible not to notice, but the chase continued, and the girl tried to reduce their distance, making quick dashes. Soon the criminal made a daring jump from roof to roof, which made one think that the chase would end there. But we shouldn't forget that our heroine has excellent training, so the girl jumped after him without any fear. Meanwhile, the lieutenant and sergeant knocked down the door to the building from which the criminal was escaping. There was little time, because they could possibly save someone's life. The shot came from the top floor, so they had to hurry, and our heroine continued the chase. But suddenly, something unexpected happened. The criminal stopped and, turning his head, simply looked in the direction of the girl. A moment later, he spread his arms out to the sides and took a step forward, falling into an open fall. Our heroine was in shock, but he hoped in vain that she would allow him to slip through her fingers. In the same way, without any fear, the girl took a step forward and jumped after him. At this time, the police finally reached the right room, and having broken down the door, began to address the residents of the apartment, but immediately noticed that he was already dead. Kim started to sarcastically say that he was just sleeping. Can't you see how hard he was trying to charm William with how divinely he fell dead? The lieutenant, perplexed, told her to shut up because this was no joke, and the murder looked like. However, at this moment, Kim actually became more serious and asked the lieutenant to take a closer look. The lieutenant's face instantly changed. Near the corpse, they noticed the same flower, which they had definitely seen more than once. The guy immediately started talking in horror about how he was here and that it was definitely his doing. Kim, who had literally just been joking, changed her expression to one of wild fear. Meanwhile, our heroine was still chasing the vile criminal, who had no intention of stopping. However, fatigue and endurance were not as important as honoring herself, so Lauren did not even think about stopping. At that very moment, Kim screamed her friend's name in horror, saying that she had to stop her. She ran out in horror and started following down, saying that this guy could kill her. But Lauren was doing just fine at this point, because they had finally reached a dead end, which only meant that he had been caught. However, the criminal was not going to give up, so he began jumping from wall to wall. Of course, he climbed quickly, but our heroine was faster, which is why she managed to knock him down. But the criminal was no slouch, because he reacted in time and managed to grab the girl by the leg. Soon they fell to the ground on top of each other, and the officer's pistol flew off in the other direction. Our heroine reacted quickly, realizing that she could not remain on the ground for long. At that very moment, the criminal jumped up from the ground when the girl wanted to attack him. Soon a blow followed, and then another, but the guy deftly dodged each one. And yet, finally waiting for the officer to make a mistake, he was able to grab her. Instantly, he dealt the girl a powerful blow to the back, causing her to bounce back into the wall. Our heroine wanted to react quickly and shoot, but she realized that she had dropped her revolver, which meant that at this rate, the criminal would simply kill her. The only thing left to do was to improvise and not give up, so the girl turned around sharply and screamed. At that very moment, a quick and instant kick from the bottom up awaited her, causing her mask to simply fly off. Shortly after he had carried out a successful series of attacks, the criminal grabbed his blade. It was this night that he could have killed Lauren, but the girl turned her head and looked into the eyes of the killer. Right at the moment when he was about to swing his blade, the guy simply froze upon seeing the girl. Lauren didn't know why he stopped, but if she had known who he was and what he had done, things would have been different. And yet, the guy really seemed to be under some kind of spell. Our heroine still couldn't understand why he wasn't moving, because she was completely open. Either way, she didn't want to think about it for too long either, so she decided to attack first. The guy flew to the side and simply fell to the ground, which meant he was defeated. Lauren soon sat over him and began digging in her pocket to find the handcuffs. A moment later, his hands were handcuffed, and the officer nevertheless took her revolver. After this, the girl told the criminal that he had the right to remain silent, and anything he said could and would be used against him in court. The guy suddenly smiled and said that she didn't have to bother, because he would leave before she finished reading him his rights. Lauren looked at him with disdain and said that he had just committed murder, which meant he would not be able to escape anytime soon, and he could be sure of that. The guy asked in a sarcastic voice if this was really true, and what she was going to do with a bad guy like him. Putting a revolver to his head, the girl said that she would do whatever it took to bring him to justice. The guy suddenly laughed and said that they both knew perfectly well that she wouldn't shoot him. However, our heroine replied that she was a police officer and she was trained to shoot when necessary, so it was better not to move. Once she had subdued the criminal, Lauren began reaching for the radio. However, at that moment, the criminal stopped her, saying that she was indeed an officer, but he was a murderer. The guy said he knew what a person who was going to kill looked like, but she clearly didn't look like she was going to pull the trigger. After analyzing the criminal's words, she caught herself thinking that the guy admitted that he was the killer. The girl immediately began to ask if he was really in cahoots with the Ghost Scythe organization. The criminal suddenly laughed, saying as if sarcastically that he could not possibly be from there. With a heavy sigh, our heroine nodded her head and said that he was right about only one thing. She would not kill him today. She needed the guy alive so she could beat all the information about the ghostly scythe out of him before he went to rot in prison where he belonged. The police officer told him to confess nicely where his leader was hiding. The guy, perplexed, said that he had no idea what she was even talking about since he worked for himself. Lauren told him to stop talking nonsense because she knew who he was. At that very moment, the guy laughed, saying that it was very presumptuous of her, but he decided to admit that he liked her optimism. He smiled and replied that if he were part of a large and terrible ghostly scythe, she would be running away right now. Lauren at this point said that she thought he was being overconfident. He had committed 2 murders in one night, right next to each other, and he had left witnesses. In conclusion, she said that this city had seen worse criminals than amateurs like him. Smiling, the guy asked if it was really that bad, and he thought he had planned everything carefully. He did everything perfectly, at least he thought so. Lauren was losing control, saying that resorting to justice might be one of the best ideas he could have come up with. Suddenly, he began to laugh, saying that he did not remember such thoughts, because he had never been able to catch him before, much less defeat him. Sinclair responded that this was also a lie, and so he should stop talking. He had been beaten before, and today it happened again. Still, she advised him not to worry, because once he was behind bars, he would have plenty of time to convince people that he was invincible. The guy started laughing more and more, telling the officer that she definitely had the gift of the gab, and he liked it. Or, more accurately, just bravery based on ignorance. Pinning him to the ground, our heroine said in bewilderment that she didn't know who he thought he was, but she promised to find his leader and make sure he got what he deserved. She assured him that no matter who he took her for, he had no idea what she was capable of or how far she was willing to go. The guy smiled and asked her what it was. Was she not doing this because of her professional duties? The girl calmed down, and the criminal continued to say that he was sure that all of her fellow police officers despised the leader. However, it is unlikely that they despised him as much as she did, because her hatred is personal, a thirst for revenge, isn't it? Looking into her eyes, he asked her to answer his question. Who died? Was it a member of her family? With each suggestion, the girl's gaze changed, and the guy continued to go through the options. Perhaps a loved one, or, to be realistic, a close friend. At that moment, her teeth clenched even harder. This meant only one thing: a precise hit from the criminal on one of the officer's little secrets. The guy then suggested that this was precisely why the girl became a police officer. Our heroine's hand was shaking, either from fear or from anger, or from everything at once. But was she careless? Either way, she decided she wouldn't let it happen again, so she pulled the trigger. Instead, the girl reached for the radio, but suddenly the criminal told her that she should not do this. Lauren asked why, confused, To which the guy replied that they had a common goal. He, just like her, wants to find the leader and destroy him. The girl asked again in bewilderment. In turn, he asked her to admit that, as a police officer, she would never be able to catch him. He added that even in the circles of killers, no one knew where he was or who he was, and he was no exception. But if she really wanted to keep her promise, then he would be the best means. Our heroine asked in bewilderment, does he seriously think that she would get involved with such a freak like him? But at the same time, she did not see that he was lying, which means that even the killers do not know where the leader is. The guy told her that no matter how confident he was in his abilities, he knew that he couldn't find it alone. He smiled and said he needed an assistant who could provide him with information and an alibi. A sort of pet, so to speak. Our heroine at this point asked even more perplexedly what he was talking about. She again decided to clarify what was what, but the guy suddenly interrupted her and said that she was a policeman and he was a murderer. If they combined their efforts, the chances of finding the leader would increase many times over. They'll be able to work on this, literally, on both sides of the law. What does she think about that? And again, the girl hit him, saying that she was not going to cooperate with him. She saw him kill women, old people and children without any regret, which means that people like him are the worst scum of humanity. That's why it was better not to waste time. The police officer advised him to save his strength for the judge. However, at that moment, the guy laughed and said that something funny happened. He said he had seen her perform at the cafe today and had to admit she had a tough grip. He also noticed that she was a tiny human lie detector, although she didn't try very hard to hide it, so he was sure that she knew perfectly well that he wasn't lying to her right now. The guy asked about a deal. Since they wanted the same thing, they should join forces. He could provide her with information about the Phantom Scythe's doings that no cop would ever hear about. She could share similar information about the police station with him, and of course, if something went wrong, she could provide him with an impeccable alibi. Our heroine was perplexed and did not understand. Did he really take her for an idiot? And the criminal continued to talk about how it seemed to him that even her intuition, or whatever it was, would also be useful to them. He was sure that even if she didn't always give the right answers, at least they would be able to cross out the wrong ones. Our heroine was shocked and didn't understand how he understood it so easily. Does he really believe it? What's wrong with this guy? Nevertheless, the guy assured her that he would help her find the leader, and in exchange, she would throw away the revolver and let him go. Well, of course, if she's stupid enough to try to send him to jail, she won't get a word out of him. And besides, he reminded her that he was also going to escape without her help. But our heroine reminded him that he was handcuffed with a revolver pointed at his head. The guy started to say sarcastically that it was very insulting. After all, he was a murderer. Did she really think that some handcuffs or bars would be able to stop him? As if with a snap of his finger, he separated his hands, which were now free. Our heroine didn't even have time to come to her senses. And what's more, the girl didn't even have time to ask a question because of the criminal's speed. A moment later, the girl was lying on the ground with a blade pressed to her head. Looking into her eyes, he said that she was right about one thing. They were monsters, and he killed them without hesitation. Moreover, with a cold-blooded look, he admitted that he had no regrets. That's why Lauren can be sure that he will not hesitate to slit her little throat if she tries to stand in his way. In any case, having removed the blade, the criminal added that everything depended only on her. Finally hiding his sword, the guy said that it was time for him to run, and he was giving her 24 hours to think it over carefully. Well, of course, if she decides to, they can meet tomorrow on the bridge at midnight. Now it was time to say goodbye, so the guy asked her not to be late and also wished her sweet dreams. Having finally come to her senses, our heroine decided that it was time for her to get up, even though little of it fit into her head at the moment. Then the girl stood for a while and watched the killer, wondering what to do. This took time, so Lauren took out her radio and reported that she had missed the target. The girl clenched her hand tightly and soon turned off the radio, because now she was caught between two fires. Either way, it was time to go back, so Lauren reached for her mask. Meanwhile, all emergency services, both ambulances and police, arrived in the city. At that moment, there was real chaos in the city, because everyone was running around and wondering what was happening. Our heroine arrived at that moment. One of the victims was being carried out on a stretcher and carried into the car. However, now it was necessary to find her squad, so the girl began to turn her head. Soon she noticed Kim, as well as the lieutenant, who was reporting something. The guy was talking about how he would need 2 officers for the mission, so he could start soon. At that moment, Kim, who was nervously twitching her finger, heard a rustling sound nearby and raised her head. To her incredible surprise, she saw Lauren, causing her to immediately run towards her. Hawks then turned his head, shocked by Kim's speed and sharpness. At this point, the girl grabbed her friend and asked if she was okay, and if she was hurt. In any case, she was incredibly happy that Lauren had returned alive. Our heroine, perplexed, said that everything was fine and asked why she was so worried. William at this point said that she had been gone for so long that he was about to send someone to look for her. The guy asked what had happened. Lauren replied that he had escaped. She thought that he was already in her arms, but she did not have enough strength to hold him. Kim cried out in bewilderment, asking if she had really managed to catch him. And soon after that, she became scared because she noticed that Lauren was bleeding. Hawks was so angry that he asked in bewilderment if it was really this bastard who did this to her. Our heroine wiped her face and said that she herself understood perfectly well that she had been careless, so it would not happen again. Kim suddenly asked her friend if she had actually fought him, to which our heroine replied that she had almost managed to hurt him, but not badly enough to slow him down. Still surprised, Kim then asked if she had really managed to catch him. Our heroine calmly said that he had run away from her. The girl, perplexed, said that she was the only one who had managed to catch him. Lieutenant Hawks, although no less surprised than Kim, still asked for a description of the killer. Lauren said that he was a tall man, thin but strong enough, dressed in a long black cloak, about 20 or 30 years old, and she saw only a sword on him. William said that this was remarkable, and that Captain Herman was in second place and waiting for her report. But first he asked her to help bandage her arm. Our heroine suddenly remembered, asking if Captain Herman was here too. In that case, she definitely couldn't be late. The boys pointed to her hand, but Lauren assured them that she was fine. First, she wanted to submit her report, and only then get down to minor matters. Kim sighed heavily and grabbed her friend, saying that she was always overworking herself, and that it was bad for her health. The girl asked her to wait a second, because she could help, but at that moment, Kim was stopped by a puzzled lieutenant. The guy reminded her that with her skills, she would rather kill her than vice versa. Kim asked in confusion what he just said. William reminded her that the last time she treated him, he drank a strange tea she made, which kept him on the toilet for a week. Kim in turn said that she was very happy, because he deserved all this suffering. At this point, Lauren said that if she waited for them, she would rather die from blood loss. Nevertheless, William approached her, coughed a little, and asked her to rest, because he assumed that she still had not realized who exactly she had just fought with. The girl sighed and said that she knew who it was. It was the ghost scythe killer. Kim, in turn, replied that this was not some ordinary killer, and that she was lucky to be alive. The girl asked in bewilderment what she was talking about, but the lieutenant moved forward, saying that she would see for herself. At that moment, Kim approached Lauren and asked if she had even seen his face. After thinking for a bit, our heroine said that she had not seen his face. However, at that moment she thought, asking herself when she started lying to her own colleagues. She clearly remembered his thin, cold-blooded face looking at her. In any case, we are transported to the second scene of the incident, where emergency services were also present. Soon our heroes arrived on the top floor and were about to give a report. At this time, detectives were actively working at the scene, studying every detail. The moment the boys entered the room, Captain Herman turned his head and addressed the lieutenant. The guy bowed down and reported that Officer Lauren had finally returned. The man sighed in relief, saying that he was glad to hear it, but he also asked her to report what she knew. Lauren began to talk about the killer getting away. She and 2 other officers pursued him, but they soon fell behind. The girl chased him for as long as she could and engaged in battle with him before losing him. Hawks added that Officer Sinclair got close enough to confirm that they were dealing with a man, tall, thin, in his 20s or 30s. Nodding his head, Captain Herman said he understood, and that was truly impressive. He was pleased with the girl's work, But at that moment, she asked in surprise what had happened here. The lieutenant did indeed come to his senses and turned to Sergeant Liddell and Lieutenant Hawks, asking them to give evidence. Kim began to say that the victim's name was Robert de la Rocca, 40 years old, male. He was a wealthy merchant and owned a large share of the Royal Navy's shipyards, which was the main source of his wealth. His influence on the shipping market was considerable, as was that of the late lady who lived opposite. He was known to have close ties to the royal family, so it was no surprise that the ghostly scythe targeted both of them. But the lieutenant still decided that it was strange, since they had both recently publicly expressed their negative attitude towards the monarchy. Perhaps this was an attempt to save their own skins, because no one who supports members of the royal family is immune. One way or another, the ghostly scythe is always aimed only at the ruling family of the Citadel. The detective said that was a good guess, but forensics found something. It looked like the man was resisting the killer. The shots they heard were from the first man's gun. Our heroine Lauren confirmed this theory, because she saw only a sword on the killer. It seems that he got into the mansion through the window and waited for his target to fall into a trap. The girl suddenly asked if he hadn't expected the victim to have a revolver on him. De la Rocca must have tried to defend himself and fired at the killer, but he missed. He tried to run away and shoot the killer at the same time, but he ended up crashing into a table. If the victim had indeed been running, that would explain the wound on his back. He must have turned to try and shoot the killer again, but the killer caught up with the victim, finished his life and his work, and escaped through the window. That's when Lauren noticed him. At this point, the criminologists fell silent in bewilderment, because all their theories had been thrown into the trash. In turn, Detective Oliver smiled and told Officer Sinclair that she had given them an excellent analysis. Soon even the captain sighed, asking to leave the investigation to the investigators. The detective suddenly said that the case would be open tomorrow, so they could certainly claim that today's 2 murders were committed by the same person, because the methods were similar. But one could certainly accept the terrible fact that this was the worst thing that had ever happened in Ardalis. Captain Herman said at this point that he would notify the castle and the royal guard. They needed to tighten security before he struck. The detective, in turn, replied that he had not shown up in the city for a long time, and that killing 2 people in one night was not his style. Hawks suddenly said that it was just like a parasite. Just when you think it's finally gone for good, it'll crawl out again from somewhere. Kim also sighed heavily and said that, as always, the same sneaky bastards slipped through their fingers. They were closer than ever, but still couldn't catch him. Our heroine asked her friend in bewilderment what she was talking about. Had they already identified the killer? The detective and the captain looked at each other in surprise and fell silent. Soon the detective decided to break the silence by saying that they did it instantly. At this point, Herman added that the killer had left them his business card. Turning to one of the investigators, he asked to bring it. He soon handed over a packet of evidence, revealing that the killer she had encountered today was none other than the purple hyacinth. Just seeing this flower, our heroine lost the gift of speech and simply froze in place. Meanwhile, the killer was sitting in one of the alleys, smiling and sniffing his favorite flower. The action takes us to a dark area where the crime rate was definitely very high. Quite a few people were wanted, but these posters in such and such places were of little use. The bar was quite busy that evening, which meant that there was indeed a high demand for alcohol. The boys were discussing their own. One man was talking about how his boys had robbed some feeble-minded aristocrats just yesterday. It was like stealing something from a child, crying as much. Every time they saw a knife, they screamed like they were being cut. They looked like they were about to die of fear. At that very moment, the whole company began to laugh, and it was so loud that undoubtedly everyone who was in the bar enjoyed this laughter. And the funniest thing is that these people will then complain to the police, as if they can do something, but it's just another squealing pigsty. And again, the whole company began to laugh loudly. But at that moment, one silhouette passed by their table. A moment later, the man froze, because what he saw shocked him a little. In front of them was the same killer we had known before, who silently entered the bar. However, the guys immediately fell silent, saying that this was the same PH, and still one of them advised to speak more quietly, because this guy is dangerous. He is the most ruthless of them all. The man continued to smoke his cigar, saying that he too had heard that this guy was crazy, and that he had more deaths than everyone else in the ghostly scythe combined. No one has ever had the courage to do what he did. He is a demon sent straight from hell. But one of them hiccuped and said in disbelief that he couldn't be that bad. Had any of them seen him before? The guy at that moment said that he had seen him a couple of times, and he probably came to report another murder. And again, the drunk decided to bet that this guy only barks loudly and does not bite. He is simply the leader's favorite puppet. That is, a service dog. Of course he thinks he's better than them. The common slum rats. Isn't the whole point to be above that? A moment later, he slammed the bottle down on the table and picked up a knife, asking why he didn't say hello to his comrades. Soon after these words, the boy threw the blade towards the so-called demon. At that moment, the guy grabbed the blade with a light movement of his hand, as if it were a normal thing. Turning his head, he glanced at the one who had done this stupid thing. Immediately after that, he threw the blade back, but decided to give a warning this time, so the knife stuck into the center of the table. Meanwhile, all the people in the bar fell silent and stared at PH, anticipating what he would do next. But the guys decided not to tempt fate, so one of them slammed his head on the table and began to apologize deeply. The guy said that their friend had had too much to drink and therefore didn't understand what he was doing. The killer smiled broadly and said that everything was fine, but it was better not to do it again. The boys looked at him in bewilderment, asking what he could do to them. Looking at them, the guy said that perhaps next time he would drop by here to report their death. Soon after, he headed for the exit, and the one who caused the conflict was given another lesson, telling him not to irritate him. Meanwhile, the guy came out and moved towards the hangar, passing by various cages. As he passed one of them, the killer suddenly stopped and stared at a chair. Looking at this place definitely brought back some bad memories, and yet, taking a deep breath, he decided to move in the direction he had originally been going. Only after opening the door did he notice a table inside, as well as a man standing in a mask. This man was the fourth messenger from the ghostly scythe. The guy began to report the successful completion of the mission without further ado. The targets Robert de la Rocca and Rosa Grayson were eliminated that night. Also, reaching into his pocket, the guy said that he had brought the documents that the leader wanted to get. Throwing them on the table, the guy added that, as expected, they were both working for the police, trying to infiltrate the ghost scythe, but were careless enough to leave evidence behind. The messenger asked if there was any more information. The guy stated that Grayson's maid had called the police, and they had arrived as he was finishing his second assignment. And yet, these fools were as slow as always, which is why he left calmly. The messenger replied in surprise that it was not like him to be taken by surprise. He hoped no one had seen him anyway. The guy laughed and said that it was some kind of stupidity because no one saw him. The messenger sighed and said that in any case, it did not matter, because he had done his job, as always. But suddenly, the smile on his face quickly disappeared, just as it had appeared. His mind flashed back to the second mission, where Robert, the man he was supposed to eliminate, suddenly started stuttering. The man spoke in bewilderment about the fact that he was that very boy. But he didn't have time to finish, because by then, the killer had already finished what he had come for in the first place. The guy just nodded his head and said that, as always, he had coped, so everything was fine. The messenger replied that he was glad to hear this, and the leader would be equally glad. And also, the man decided to give advice. It is better not to disappoint the leader, because he may be Purple Hyacinth, but he is still watching him. The killer smiled and said that he never even thought of disappointing the leader. The messenger then said that that was all for him, and that they would contact him again soon. Turning around, Purple Hyacinth said goodbye to his comrade and thanked him for the warm welcome. And yet, just before leaving, the boy asked in bewilderment who would be so reckless as to threaten the leader. Well, the action once again takes us to our heroine, who has just learned that the killer was the Purple Hyacinth. The girl was in incredible shock at that moment, because she didn't believe that it was him and that she was chasing him. Kim, at that moment, asked not to be ashamed that she had missed him, because for the last 7 years, no one had even been able to get close to him. Moreover, the girl told her friend that she was lucky to be alive. However, Lauren kept thinking about something she should have realized right away. The Purple Hyacinth is the most powerful weapon in the arsenal of the Ghost Scythe. It is this man who is responsible for the bloodiest crimes the city has ever seen. He never left any traces or evidence, except for one thing. Near the body of each of the killer's victims were his signatures, the signatures of Purple Hyacinth. What is even more terrible is for the girl to realize that she almost became one of these corpses. Detective Oliver suddenly turned to Officer Sinclair and said that civilians sometimes said that at night they saw his shadow running across the rooftops, but no one had ever come close enough to be able to describe him the way she did today. They may have lost a valuable official, but at least now they know who they are looking for. The man assured that the parts she had supplied them with today were priceless. Therefore, as always, the work was done perfectly. Our heroine couldn't even smile. This certainly couldn't be a good job. After all these years, they finally managed to catch him, and she just let him go. And yet, Captain Herman, at that moment, declared that it was a reckless move, because she should have waited for reinforcements, even though she was lucky today. But these words still managed to make the girl laugh, so she smiled, thinking that such luck would be very useful. Somehow, at this point, the lieutenant assumed that the killer hadn't expected the maid to wake up, or that the police would respond so quickly. They were lucky to be there. Kim suddenly said that it could have been intentional. 2 murders, one after the other, to make sure they saw him, but they still couldn't catch him. A show of force, nothing more. The captain thought about it at this point, saying that this was most likely exactly what happened. This psychopath has been mocking the royal family for years, not to mention them. Purple Hyacinth takes over the family crest as some kind of silly joke. The point is that the royal family crest features purple hyacinths. At this point, Lieutenant Hawks decided to correct the captain by saying that he took it more as a threat. Our heroine at this point asked in surprise, "What if this is, on the contrary, an apology? What if he leaves hyacinths as an apology for the murder?" Kim immediately replied that it was impossible. If he had any regrets, they would have long since drowned in the blood on his hands. And yet, Lauren suddenly fell silent, remembering Purple Hyacinth's words about him having no regrets. The girl sighed and said that Kim was most likely right, so her thought was immediately cut off. The detective suddenly said that in any case, such political pressure was not his style. Raka and Grayson had recently been hired as double agents. They were tasked with attempting to infiltrate the Ghost Scythe's underground network, and only those with the highest level of security clearance knew about it. This made the investigation a little difficult, as it seemed like the leader was always one step ahead. The captain suddenly turned to Hawks, Liddell, and Sinclair, and thanked them for arriving so quickly. The investigating authorities would take care of the rest, and they could go and rest. All 3 police officers nodded their heads and said that they would head home immediately. After a while, the guys came home, confused, discussing what had happened today. Kim said that she was even pleased to see that he still had something against Lauren. Our heroine just sighed and spread her arms out to the sides, making it clear that she hadn't expected anything else. The lieutenant at this point turned to the sergeant and asked if she was sure she didn't mean herself. Kim sighed heavily and asked him what he wanted to tell her by this and why. The guys immediately started arguing like cats and dogs, which was common practice. In turn, our heroine thought about her own a little and looked down, but soon she was brought to her senses by the guys, who asked if she was following them. A few moments later, the guys were already outside and walking along the night street. Since it was late and Kim was almost asleep before she was called, she walked and yawned the whole way. Anyway, she was glad that it was time to go home, but suddenly she decided to look at the time, but was suddenly surprised. Looking at her watch, she said that it was definitely working faster today, and it was already too late. The girl immediately told the guys that she was heading home and was going to sleep for the rest of the night. However, when she approached William, she told him to make sure that Lauren got home safe and sound. Otherwise, he was a dead man. Soon after, the girl turned around and said goodbye to them for good. Lauren waved happily as her friend walked away, while the lieutenant waved at her once, without much enthusiasm. Soon our heroine smiled and asked Will not to worry, because she could get there herself, so she wished him good night. However, at that moment, the guy grabbed her hand and made it clear that this would not work. Hawks asked in surprise if she really thought he would let her walk alone at night. The girl asked him in surprise what he was talking about, To which the guy replied that she had just spent half the night chasing the most notorious killer in their city. He could be anywhere, but our heroine still chose to insist that everything was fine. He knows better than anyone that she can stand up for herself. The guy smiled and said that he knew that. But wouldn't she let her good old friend walk her home just once? They were on the same path anyway. Lauren smiled back and told her mom that she agreed. But there was no point in delaying, because her bed was already waiting for her. The guy laughed and said that at least one of them would be able to sleep well tonight. Suddenly, Hawks asked if she missed their college days. Sighing, the girl replied that those were certainly good times when there were no midnight calls about deranged criminals. Lauren remembered the past with only a smile on her face, because it was a carefree time. The lieutenant suddenly said that he sometimes wondered what would have happened if they had graduated earlier. Lauren decided that it would have been very boring and that they had driven their mentors crazy. The guy laughed and said that was true. But who would have thought that they would go from playing cops and robbers in Lauren's mom's garden to this? Raising her head, our heroine said that she certainly could not have thought about this. Everything was changing too fast, making it hard to keep track of everything. Anyway, Lauren looked at the lieutenant and asked how his mother was. At that moment, the guy lowered his head and said that everything was as usual, nothing new. The girl nodded and said she hoped she would get better soon. He had tried so many things that something had to work. William looked down at the floor with a sad expression. It was clear from his eyes that he was, unfortunately, losing hope. However, the girl decided to dilute the situation by talking about work. The girl laughed and said that he had become completely relaxed with his duties. She winked and added that his squad was completely out of control. All he had to do was look at her and Kim. Just hearing the name, Kim Liddell, Hawks's face darkened, as he didn't really want to remember that thorn in his side. This woman drives him crazy. She never listens, and every time he opens his mouth, she starts swearing. Lauren suddenly laughed and blessed her. She suddenly asked if she wasn't the best. The guy said sharply that she was the worst and cursed the day they met. Lauren suddenly said that she would be offended to hear that. The lieutenant at this point said that she was lucky to be observant, and that she better never miss her target. Soon they were laughing together. Anyway, in the meantime, the guys finally arrived at Lauren's house, which meant it was time to say goodbye. William smiled and said that everything had changed since they received their name tags. Still, to be honest, he was glad that some things hadn't changed at all. Lauren suddenly turned her head and silently said that some things will never change at all. Anyway, she smiled and thanked the gentleman. His lady was delivered safe and sound, which meant he could now go to bed. The guy smiled back and wished her good night, saying that they would see each other again tomorrow. At first, our heroine happily waved goodbye, but soon she was left alone with her thoughts again. Finally getting home, the girl began to remember the words of the purple hyacinth. He told her that she was not doing all this out of her professional duty. It's all personal and so on. But the girl asked herself, who is she anyway? Team up with the most dangerous criminal in the city? Clutching the newspaper, the girl became increasingly tense at the mere thought that she might be in league with the purple hyacinth. But his words, which he spoke truly sincerely, stuck in his head. They had a common goal: to find and destroy the leader. No one has ever seen him, and those who have seen him have never been able to tell anyone about it. Only Lauren could see it. At that very moment, the girl opened the curtain hiding the board. From that very day, after the tragedy at the station, our heroine wanted to destroy all the creatures responsible for his death. They took away the person dearest to Lauren, who still haunts her dreams. Only revenge drove her all this time, and it was also the fuel for not giving up. Lauren even wanted to save others from the same fate, but her own investigation led her nowhere in the entire 10 years. And one wonders, isn't it stupid that this killer is now offering his help? He would have been her main trump card. Of course, these words are true, but this search then almost deprived Lauren of her mind. With a heavy sigh, the girl squeezed the newspaper again and threw it in the other direction. There were too many thoughts in her head, but one, the most important thought, is that she must let it all go and not torture herself. As soon as the girl opened the board, she closed it in the same way, because something was holding her back. At the same time, in her head were the words of the purple hyacinth, who told her that she could meet him tomorrow on the bridge at midnight. And yet, with a heavy sigh, The girl finally decided that she would have nothing to do with him. The reason for this was that she convinced herself that all this was long in the past, and it was worth moving away from it. The action soon takes us to the next day, namely to the Ardalis police station. Our heroine came to work early in the morning. However, she didn't like being late. At this time, many colleagues were sitting in the office, which meant there was enough work for today. Taking off her mask, the girl greeted everyone in a slightly sleepy voice. Cute Secretary Lila Des Roses smiled broadly and greeted the Sinclair officer. Our heroine was glad to see this sweet girl, who was always kind to every person. However, there were those who were more gloomy than anyone from the ghostly scythe. This was Officer Lucas, also known as the Grumpy Cat, as he was usually called. The boy swore to God that if he had to greet another person that morning, someone might die. At this time, Kim was also sitting at her workplace and suddenly heard a familiar voice. The girl happily jumped up from her seat and screamed loudly, greeting Lauren. However, at that very moment, the girl began to complain, saying that she was in real grief and needed help. Kim said with a plaintive look that she didn't even know if she could endure all this, because her soul ached from lack of sleep. The lieutenant began to slap his hand, telling the sergeant that she should pull herself together and stop whining in vain. He reminded her that Lauren and he had slept the same amount and that they were fine, to which Kim responded in bewilderment that this was not true, because Lauren never sleeps. Our heroine asked them to calm down, saying that she was undoubtedly a little guilty. Either way, it's a great day for patrolling and chasing down slackers. William asked Kim in surprise what she was talking about. What about the paperwork she hadn't finished? The girl was instantly overcome with trembling. She began to slowly but surely turn her head. A few moments later, she started saying that she had a terrible headache and it seemed like she was going to pass out. The guy sighed heavily and said that he had not known before that she had such an obvious talent for acting. Had she thought about changing her profession? The girl wanted to shut Hawk's mouth, but just at that moment, someone was talking to the sergeant on the radio. Kim picked it up and said she was in touch. The voice on the other side responded that she was being requested to go to the shooting range in 45 minutes. She will be replacing Sergeant Collins, overseeing the firearms examination. The girl immediately said happily that she will be there. With a heavy sigh, the girl said that she was very sorry to inform him, but her acting career would have to wait, because it seemed that someone with his amazing skills was still needed here. Immediately after this, she stuck out her tongue, clearly mocking Hawks. Their gazes met like true enemies, but still, this battle was lost. Shortly after, the boy approached Desrose's secretary, who was passing by. The lieutenant smiled and asked if she could put the stack of papers on Liddell's desk when she returned, which he would greatly appreciate. The secretary was even a little confused at this point, but said that she would be happy to help him. This action meant that the war was not lost after all. Kim almost broke the radio in anger. Lauren was enjoying her morning coffee and commenting on how adorable these guys were today. Lucas snorted at this point, saying that he wished it would be illegal to be so energetic. Anyway, the guy reminded them that they had a meeting in the conference room and they better get there before he asked for them as the next targets for shooting. The guy even suggested that after this, they would remain silent forever. Now, at this moment, there was silence, because the guy definitely sounded serious, and no one wanted to mess with him. The action soon takes us to a conference room where a meeting was about to begin. After a while, Captain Herman entered the room, so all the policemen immediately stood up and greeted him. The man wished everyone a good morning and began to speak. As many of them already know, 2 high-ranking figures were killed last night in the 11th precinct. That's why, after a little investigation, it became clear that they were dealing with the purple hyacinth again. But thanks to Officer Sinclair, they now know it's a man, about 1.8 meters tall, and under 30 years old. Our heroine's face darkened at this point. Anyway, the captain continued to say that he had disappeared, but it was still worth reporting anyone who acted suspiciously and matched the description. The castle had already been warned, so they were waiting for more specific instructions from the police chief. The entire squad nodded and said they understood. Lauren at that moment sat with a guilty feeling in her soul and thought that this was not all she knew about him, because she had seen his face. She knows exactly what he looks like and where he'll be tonight. But they're too close to catching him. After correcting the documents, The captain added that by the end of the week, he needed volunteers to guard the Viscount Redcliffe's ball, which was taking place on October 13th. His Majesty's right hand, Lord Resmel, has personally requested to attend the event, and many high-ranking nobles are expected to attend. Either way, if they decide to volunteer, then they need to know, since they are Ardalis police officers, their job must be done perfectly, and that's all he has for today. The man told his people that they were all free. All the people soon stood up and wished them a good day. Our heroine also stood up and thought, the purple hyacinth probably expects that she will not come alone, and perhaps this is a trap. And soon she decided that it wasn't just possible, it was 100% true. He knew about her, and even if he wasn't lying, she didn't believe in his little deal. At this point, the lieutenant turned to his men and said that those who would be on the next patrol should follow him. The guy said that they would go on the route this morning. But he didn't have time to finish, because Lauren interrupted him and said that she would be back in a couple of minutes. Our heroine immediately ran, and Kim finally said that she shouldn't do this, but the girl wasn't going to listen to anyone. A moment later, she was peeking out from around the corner and watching the captain. She needed to make sure they caught him tonight, one way or another. But then, how was she going to explain it all? The girl approached the captain and said that she had been thinking about the murder the previous night, and had come up with several theories that might be useful to. Hermann interrupted her and said that looking at her bags, he had no doubt that she had spent the whole night obsessed with this, as always. Her attention to detail and analysis of the crime scene was simply amazing. And yet, having stopped, the man decided to ask whether it was worth reminding him at all. He decided to remind her that there was a reason why she was no longer on the investigative committee. The action is transferred to the past, where our heroine was in the role of a person from the investigative committee, and during one of the interrogations she began to have hysterics because she felt the lie that was believed. Our heroine wanted to say something in her defense, but the captain said that if she still remembered any details of the purple hyacinth's appearance, she could contact the detective. Oliver is in charge of this case, and the investigative committee will be doggedly pursuing any leads they believe will lead them to the killer's plans. But still, in all honesty, he would have preferred that Lauren didn't even get involved in this, since she had already embarrassed them enough. At that moment, Lila came out from the other end of the corridor, turning to the captain and saying that a call was waiting for him in his office. Finally, he said that he knew Lauren was gifted, but he took it personally, and that he couldn't allow the ghost scythe case to be investigated. Her thoughts may be biased, and today she should sleep instead of inventing theories. Incidentally, he also believed that her unit would soon be going on patrol. That's why the man turned around and wished the officer a good day in patrol. Our heroine was incredibly angry and offended, because after so much time, she was still being reproached, and she had made only one mistake. With great resentment inside, the girl nevertheless decided to freshen up, so she decided to go outside. It's been over a year, but they still think she's not fit for duty. One way or another, it wasn't possible to stand in silence for long, because at that moment, someone's shadow loomed over Lauren. We didn't have to think for long about who came to our heroine, because it was Kim, who greeted her friend with a smile on her face. After thinking for a moment, the girl assumed that Herman was acting like a complete idiot again. Lauren waved her hand and asked her friend not to worry about it, because nothing terrible had happened. Kim sighed and asked if she knew that she didn't need Lauren's weird ability to tell she was lying. The girl immediately laughed awkwardly and looked away. Soon she said that the captain thought it appropriate to remind her of her mistake again. Kim was very unhappy about this, and she herself did not understand why they were all so rude to Lauren, because she was not the first in this department who had ever made a mistake. But in any case, even she could see that Herman was singling her out, as if there was no one else. Our heroine sighed and looked away, suggesting that she had given him a good reason for that. In this case, Kim decided to ask why her uncle doesn't help her, because he is the chief of police, and this has been going on for quite some time. Lauren asked her friend to slow down, saying that she could not take advantage of Uncle Tristan's position. Our heroine doesn't need his help to become a detective, and she won't use it to get her title back. She'd rather end up on the streets than do that. Kim smiled and told her friend that she had no doubt that she would have done just that. One way or another, spreading her arms out to the sides, she said that it would be better to just forget about this situation. Lauren thanked her friend for her support and soon said that she had to go, but they would see each other soon. She also asked her to try not to terrorize the students during the shooting exam. The girl snorted and said that she didn't even know the word, so nothing terrible would happen. Within a few moments, the action takes us to the shooting range, where Kim has certainly got a taste for it. Soon, 3 clear shots rang out. At first, it seemed that only one bullet hit the target, but the girl's aim was so perfect that these same 3 bullets hit exactly the same place. After that, she turned her head to look at the students, assuming that they had some questions. At this time, the guys who were hoping to at least just hit the target were shocked by what they saw. Soon the girl started screaming, telling the rookies that this morning was good, but it could get worse. She promised that if they didn't hit the targets, she would knock them down so badly that they would regret their existence. While Kim was having fun at the training camp, our heroine was still thinking about her own things. In carrying out his duties, a person usually left behind his personal life, politics, and even his opinion. The girl is more than sure that they should have justly maintained peace and order. The policemen's identities were not only protected, but also hidden by masks. But under this symbol, they were not individuals. They were the police station of the city of Ardalis. Meanwhile, the villagers were already talking about the attacks of the Purple Hyacinth last night. They felt very sorry for Lady Grayson. Lucas heard all these rumors, as did every policeman, but the grumpy cat was the most dissatisfied of all, because the rumors spread like wildfire. Our heroine, in turn, continued to think about her own things, because she realized something. She made a mistake once, forgetting about her mask. She allowed a personal grudge to control her actions. This is what cost her her title as a detective, her self-respect, and her authority. Lauren still couldn't find answers to her questions. And yet, at that moment, the lieutenant touched the girl with his shoulder and advised her to come to her senses. Soon he smiled and said that her lovely golden eyes looked thoughtful today. These words even made the girl cringe. She promised that she would hit the next person who said thoughtful, golden eyes, and Lauren in one sentence. The guy laughed and said that there was no way out anyway. The days of her failure were too significant to forget. Kim told him everything. Our heroine sighed heavily because she hoped that this would remain only between them. But what can you do? Anyway, William looked at the girl in surprise and suddenly asked what she was thinking about. It was certainly a strange question, so our heroine asked to ask it in more detail. Lieutenant Hawks replied that she had not spoken a word since they left headquarters, and that she looked as if she were plotting murder. The guy laughed and pointed at the grumpy cat, asking the girl to be careful because he might get jealous. Lucas irritatedly answered Hawks that he heard everything. Lauren somehow encouraged Will, saying that there was nothing to worry about because she was just a little tired, because she hadn't drunk 2 liters of coffee like he had. However, the girl did not have time to finish her joke completely, because at that moment, something surprised her, if one can say so, of course. Right in the middle of the square, on a statue, stood an unknown guy who attracted the attention of those around him. People around were whispering about what had happened last night and what terrible things the Purple Hyacinth had done. At that very moment, the guy on the statue screamed and asked to be heard. It's been 10 years since the Allendale tragedy, but the police still haven't figured out anything. Of course, our heroine didn't really want to hear this topic of discussion, but still, it was worth listening to this guy. He soon went on to say that people could count on their fingers how many members of the Ghost Scythe they had taken out, and last night, the Purple Hyacinth had appeared again. The guy asked the city residents in bewilderment if this was really the protection they deserved. While our heroine was listening and turning her head, looking at the crowd of people, she noticed someone among them whom she had already met. The crowd around was jubilant, not supporting the local police, and saying that something needed to be done about it, while our heroine stood in a stupor. Soon after, the Purple Hyacinth smiled at her, as if he knew they would meet here. People were puzzled at the time, because the Purple Hyacinth had killed 2 victims right across the street from each other that night, and the police still hadn't been able to catch him. The Phantom Scythe has been ruling their city for a decade now, and it's only a matter of time before they attack the royal family and destroy everything King Philip has created. Looking at the police, the guy declared that they were the ones who should protect civilians. However, they, in turn, only put themselves on display, like peacocks, walking through the streets, but they could arrest criminals guilty of atrocities. Instead, the monster, the purple hyacinth, was still at large. For 10 years, the police have been chasing their leader, God knows who, and they have no idea who it is. People actually started to support this guy's words, saying that they can't trust them at all. It's just a shame and a disgrace. They even suggested that some of them are in league with criminals. The boys were perplexed and asked each other if they were tired of being afraid to leave the house. Our heroine was in shock at this time and kept looking in the same direction. Do they really have to constantly walk around wondering if they or their neighbor will be the next victim? The purple hyacinth, for his part, just smiled visibly. Lauren at that moment turned her head towards the lieutenant, as if trying to say something. Her eyes darted from one side to the other, as she supposed that all she had to do was scream to announce that she recognized the criminal from the night before. People were still panicking. This killing machine could be anywhere. How many more deaths would there be before he was finally arrested? At this time, the purple hyacinth smiled and transmitted words with his lips. Well, try. What was said was visible on his lips. At that moment, our heroine still wanted to say something, but the boy behind her suddenly shouted that the criminal could be anywhere and anyone. One of the men shouted, saying that the kid was right. Now everyone was under suspicion. He suddenly shouted and told the other man that he had seen him leaving the house around 1 o'clock in the morning. The guy responded in confusion, asking if he was really implying that he could be the purple hyacinth. Are they really going crazy here? Soon the man grabbed him and said that they always knew there was something fishy about him. He told him to confess his crimes. At that moment, our heroine was shaking her head in panic, trying to find the culprit, but he disappeared from sight, and the brawl among the people continued. And what's more, it had already reached the point of battles. Lauren was more than sure that this freak couldn't just disappear. The city was in a nightmare all this time. People were blaming each other and fighting. In turn, the one who started this discussion was certainly pleased with himself. The police, in turn, were not particularly happy with what was happening on their patrols. Anyway, the lieutenant turned around and told the boys that they needed to hurry. They nodded their heads, agreeing that it was getting hot in here and they needed to speed up and stop. A few moments later, they ran up to the most sincere rebels. Lucas grabbed one guy, while our heroine quickly went around the other one and grabbed him too, pulling him back. Lucas held the man as tightly as he could, but the boy wanted to break free. Of course, the policeman had to put in a little more effort to hold him in place, which is why he could have hurt the city resident a little. But our heroine also tried to restrain the man as much as she could, but due to physical strength, the man prevailed a little. At the same moment, he turned around and hit the police officer in the head with his elbow. However, soon a man came who could stop everything with just his presence. Our heroine at this moment did not even react to the fact that she had just been hit. She was more shocked. A few moments later, the stranger shouted and told everyone to shut up, asking for silence. Chief Tristan Sinclair, head of the police department, addressed residents and said he could see they were worried and he understood their frustration. Our heroine was very surprised that her uncle decided to come out and give a speech. Turning his head towards the guy on the statue, Tristan noted that, as he said, the criminal organization has been at large for a long time, and he is not the only one who is disappointed in this. The man began to talk about how each of them had a family that they were protecting, and they, like everyone else, were police officers and citizens who wanted to cleanse their city of evil. Tristan, as the chief of police, personally assured them that they put their health and safety first. As soon as people heard the chief's words, they immediately fell silent, assuming that he might be right. Lauren smiled and let out a calm breath, because Uncle, as always, was eloquent. He was right there to save the day. However, this is what they have come to, talking about the end of the ghostly scythe, while their most greedy killer is among them, enjoying the spectacle. Tristan at this point continued to talk about how this morning the king's right-hand man, Sir Rismel, had arrived to talk to him about a plan of action. The police chief assured that steps would be taken, and they would publish their plan as soon as possible. But still, addressing his fellow citizens, he said that if they really want to get rid of criminals, then they must gather their strength and not allow such discord. The guy on the statue suddenly shouted that the police chief was right. None of them here were part of that vile organization, so they shouldn't stoop to their level. Our heroine heard a lie in this man's words. which made her surprised at how he even knew about it. And yet, Lauren decided to distract herself from these thoughts, thinking that he couldn't, but Tristan kept talking about how they had to stick together, or they would be no better than these worthless criminals. You had to remember that they were there to protect the citizens, and they were listening. Don't forget to report any information that might be useful to the police. But now he asked to disperse and do his own thing. The guy at that moment smiled broadly and thanked Tristan, saying that they were at his service. At that moment, our heroine was absolutely sure of what flashed through her mind. At this time, people began to gather and leave the square, really going about their business. And the guy who originally started all this walked down from the statue with a calm soul. But looking at his smile, Lauren was more than sure that this man was a member of the Ghost Scythe. At this time, Lieutenant Hawks decided to approach the police chief to express his gratitude. The guy bowed down, saying that he had just prevented a riot, and at the same time, they were the only patrol unit in the area, so Tristan suddenly interrupted him and said that it was his job. They were there to keep the peace, and they should not respond with violence until it was unavoidable. And yet Tristan noticed that the lieutenant had said that their detachment had been here. Then hadn't he seen his niece? It was at this moment that our heroine appeared, turning to her uncle. She said that they could not let that guy go without questioning him. In turn, Tristan smiled at her and said that he was very glad to see her here. But of course, right after that, he asked why she was talking like that about that guy. Lauren laughed to herself, because this was all because they had been fooled in the most shameful way. Anyway, she said that he had almost started a riot, and he couldn't be let go so easily. Lieutenant Hawks suddenly replied that faith in people was becoming increasingly fragile, and they had to show that they were on their side. He assumed that arresting someone like him would only add fuel to the fire. Even Tristan suddenly said that Lieutenant Hawks was right. Now our heroine was saying that she knew they were in a sensitive situation, but what if the speech was a distraction from something else? A little more quietly, she added that these were all excuses from the person involved in the ghostly scythe. The police chief suddenly laughed and said that they couldn't arrest people without proper cause. They could detain him for 2 days, but that would only anger other people. Lauren still insisted that she was sure the guy was lying, and she knew for sure that Tristan suddenly stopped her and said with a smile that he knew she was right. But now was not the time, and she knew better than anyone. To start an investigation, there needed to be solid evidence. Unfortunately, her guesses couldn't override the law, and he hoped she understood that. Our heroine sighed heavily and said that she understood all this, and he was right. Tristan expressed his sympathy, but he still believed in his niece. Still, all they could do was keep an eye on that guy in case of further unrest. He soon asked to be excused, but he had a meeting to attend, so he would leave and would see Lauren again in the evening. He then wished all the officers a good day. Our heroine also smiled at him and waved, saying that they would see each other in the evening. And yet, all these years, she has been perfecting her analytical skills just to prove her guesses to others. She worked and worked to become a detective and join the investigative committee, and she could finally use her ability and help the case. But for what? Apparently, so that everything would be completely unfinished because of one mistake. Right now, her ability is useless. She knew the criminals in the crowd, but she couldn't do anything. And the people are right. The police are powerless. The members of the Ghost Scythe walk around freely, knowing that they are afraid to be arrested. No matter how hard they fight, they are still one step ahead. And they are just ridiculous. The purple hyacinth, on the other hand, certainly belongs behind bars, and that's where she should send him. But last night, he was honest with her. And yet, Lauren was terrified to realize that he might be right. He might be the only clue to catching the leader. Meanwhile, the clock struck midnight, and our heroine was standing on the bridge, which meant that there was no other way out. The girl had definitely decided for herself that she had to give him a chance, so she came to meet him. As soon as midnight struck, in fact, a smug guy appeared, walking towards Lauren. The guy sarcastically asked who this cute guy was, and decided to change his mind and come to the meeting. Our heroine sighed heavily and turned her head away, as if she was already tired of his ridicule. The guy went on to say, anyway, that the good little cop had decided to make a deal with the devil. Was she really that fixated on the refusal? But what changed then? At that very moment, The girl took out a revolver and asked if she understood correctly that he was the Purple Hyacinth, the most terrible criminal in the city. As she pulled the trigger, she said he forgot to mention it during their last conversation the night before. As she held the gun to his head, the guy smiled, assuming it was obvious since she had seen the crime scene. Lauren said, somehow surprised, that he then thought she was crazy if he thought she would make a deal with the Purple Hyacinth. The guy smiled again and said that she was not crazy, but rather extremely desperate, which she undoubtedly was. The girl, perplexed, said that she was not desperate. The Purple Hyacinth waved his finger, saying that she was just stuck wasting her strength, and the powers and resources of the ghostly scythe were going towards this. Basically, they're trying to make sure the police department never gets past all these dead ends in their investigations. Lauren suddenly said she came here because he was honest. Somehow, she didn't understand why or how this was possible, but they seemed to have the same goal. And in any case, there were many things she didn't understand about him. The guy laughed and said that he had an image of a mysterious killer that he had to maintain, and if he revealed everything on the first night, it would be a waste of time. In that case, Lauren had another question that interested her no less. Why didn't he get rid of her? The Purple Hyacinth asked in confusion if she had hit her head that hard, since he had already said that she needed a police pet to help him put his plans into action. Our heroine looked at him in bewilderment and asked why he chose her, since he knew nothing about her. The guy replied that this was indeed the case, but she was moral enough for her word to carry weight, and trusting enough to take his word at face value. He knows her and shares the same desire for revenge. And on top of that, she seems to know when someone is lying, and that makes her useful. Lauren replied that she had seen his face, so how could he be so sure that she wouldn't bring the whole police squad here? After letting go of the gun, the guy assured her that she was not the only one who saw him. Suddenly, he jumped on the railing and said that he was walking around in broad daylight with this face, and yet, surprisingly, no one was running away screaming. And to complete the picture, he added that he has no interest in eliminating people at random. Our heroine looked at him and still wondered why he trusted her. The Purple Hyacinth told her that a man obsessed with truth would not miss such a chance. If she had turned him in, she would have gotten nothing from him, and she knew it. Lauren suddenly asked him what exactly he was doing. Was he the leader's favorite puppet? The guy suddenly screamed and said that it was offensive, because he was the best killer, not a puppet. Our heroine looked at him in surprise, reminding him that he wanted to kill the leader anyway, but there was no point in it. The guy suddenly smiled and asked if she found him paradoxically charming, but the girl still stood her ground, asking why all this. Why be a follower of the leader at all if he wanted to stop him so badly? The guy stopped at that moment, and looking down, told the officer that life in the ghostly spit was far from sweet. Jumping off the railing, he added that, as in any organization, no one agrees with anything. There are a huge number of setups, but none of them have reached the top yet. The leader may not be respected by everyone, but he is certainly feared by everyone. The leader's pawns are literally everywhere, and no one knows who he is. But to kill for him, to do his dirty work, and to be the best at it. For every member of the Ghost Scythe, this is literally the only way to get close to him to stop him. Lauren then pointed out that this still didn't explain why he wanted it. The Purple Hyacinth had already responded by saying that he was afraid the question would go unanswered. His motives are not so significant, and he is indifferent to hers. It is enough that he has as many reasons as she does to want him to disappear. What's more important to him is to make his plans come true, and he needs Lauren. So the question is she going to make a deal or not? Our heroine sighed and assumed that she would have to agree. But what conditions? She wondered what he expected from her. The guy immediately smiled, because he was glad that the girl was making concessions and understanding him. Turning around, the killer said that he liked to keep things simple, so there would be only 2 rules. First of all, you can't hide information. Everything she knows, he knows, and vice versa. The same with new finds, otherwise they'll both be dead. And secondly, no personal questions, so that the first rule doesn't get out of control. Our heroine was even surprised that these were all the rules, so she decided to make sure of it by asking him again. The guy smiled and again reminded that he was simple, which meant everything was short and clear. However, he suddenly remembered, saying that he had almost forgotten the 3rd rule. The purple hyacinth decided to clarify that you can't accidentally kill each other. Will that be another rule? Lauren looked at him with the same disdain and said that the conditions were not very good. And yet, she had conditions too. She stated that she did not want to be involved in their dark, illegal business of the ghost scythe. Everything had to be strictly related to the investigation, or he could not count on her. The guy nodded and said that a good cop wants to remain a good cop, even after teaming up with the purple hyacinth. The guy's sarcasm and humor were starting to get on the girl's nerves, but he still said that he agreed to her terms. Lauren continued, "As for him, she doesn't want him in her life outside of this. He doesn't want the people she cares about to be involved, ever. What they do to him is between them." The guy smiled playfully, reassuring the officer that it was quite shameful. The girl suddenly, in bewilderment, declared that if there was another hint that he was hiding something from her, or if even one hair fell from the heads of her loved ones, then, as she began to raise her pistol, she assured him that she would not hesitate to put a bullet through his skull, and the purple hyacinth stopped her hand at that moment and said that he understood everything. Her headshots apparently always go with Lauren. Her threats, however, continue to lose their originality. The guy even laughed, suggesting that she already has an obsession with murder. The purple hyacinth sighed heavily and said that there was nothing wrong with that. The guy suddenly declared that he forgave her, saying that they all had weak spots. Our heroine looked away again with difficulty, because this humor was beginning to cross all boundaries. The girl suddenly asked how she could be sure that he wouldn't let her down. The purple hyacinth sighed even more heavily, saying that he was already tired of endless questions. If they were going to be partners, they had to trust each other. He said that if she fell, he would fall, and so on and so forth. It had been like that ever since she let him go. It would be a confidence game for both of them. They were on equal terms, which meant that if things went badly, she had her pistols and he had his sword. The only question left was this: had they agreed? Our heroine at this moment lowered her head to finally weigh the pros and cons of a deal with the devil. And just because she wanted to end this investigation and this organization, soon quiet words were heard that she agreed to cooperate. The guy immediately smiled, starting to welcome her to his team. "It's a pleasure to work with an officer." Shortly after they agreed to collaborate, the guy decided to start with an introduction, so he admitted that his name was Kieran White. Naturally, our heroine decided to maintain the acquaintance, so she introduced herself as Lauren Sinclair. The guy smiled broadly at that moment, saying that he was very pleased to meet you, but at the same moment he pulled out his sword. Our heroine tensed, realizing that she had trapped herself, but her hand still reached for the revolver. However, there was a swipe of the blade that slashed across Kieran's hand. Lauren stood there in a stupor, trying to analyze what had just happened. In turn, Kieran asked in confusion what had happened to her. In any case, he then held out his blade, saying that now it was her turn. Our heroine suddenly shook her head, telling him that this would not do, because he had killed dozens of people with this sword. The guy asked in bewilderment, did she really think he was a barbarian? He cleans it every night, otherwise the blade would rust, and that would be extremely unfortunate. The girl looked at him in surprise, as if he were a fool, and sighed heavily, assuming that there was no other choice. In any case, she decided not to take his sword out of principle, so she reached for her blade, which she soon brought to her hand. Stretching it along her arm, the girl cut her hand, soon saying that they could seal their deal. Kieran responded immediately and shook her hand, leaning a little closer. Standing over her, he smiled and added that it had already begun. After a while, the boys were jumping on the roofs, heading, no doubt, to a certain place. But our heroine didn't understand where they were running, so she decided to ask where Kieran was taking her. The guy smiled and said that they needed to get to a place where they wouldn't be heard. At that moment, the girl looked at him in surprise and asked which of them had now disgraced themselves. Kieran soon couldn't help but laugh. He liked Lauren's sense of humor. However, after some time, the boys ran up to the forest that led out of the city. Just like that very night, the boys ran past all the obstacles very quickly and deftly. Kieran suddenly turned around and decided to ask his new partner how she was doing. The girl told him that everything was fine, but she wanted to know when they would finally arrive. Literally right away, the guy stopped and said that they had just arrived, so they could take a break. After passing the waterfall, the guys entered a secret cave and Kieran went further. Approaching the grate, he unlatched it and opened it, saying that he would let the ladies go first. In just a couple of seconds, our heroine was standing in the middle of a real secret cave. The girl turned her head in surprise and was surprised that such a place was so cozy. Moreover, this place was not only a place to stay overnight, but also a real training camp where one could both train and relax. At this point, Kieran went to undress, saying that he was glad to be returning to his sweet home. Lauren still looked around in surprise, saying that she couldn't believe that he had brought her to the purple hyacinth's lair. Kieran laughed at this point and asked her to stop talking about the purple hyacinth as if it wasn't him. The girl began to wave her hand awkwardly, saying that she didn't want to say anything wrong. Either way, Kieran decided to play it off as a joke, assuming she was simply taken aback by his amazing taste in home decor. The guy sighed proudly and said that he was well aware of this, and therefore grateful for such pleasant words. Of course, the girl immediately sighed heavily because he was truly starting to irritate her. However, at that moment, Kieran grabbed the blade and at the same second threw it towards the girl. She, in turn, recoiled in bewilderment, but still managed to catch the blade. She obviously showed her displeasure and asked what that was all about. Kieran answered her, advising her to grab a weapon. Long conversations brought out the devil in him, and in any case, they had to trust each other. Rolling up his sleeves, the boy asked why they didn't test her skills while they were here. Our heroine began to take off her coat, asking if he really needed it after last night. If she remembered correctly, she had won him over. In response to this, he said that she should also remember that he had no intention of killing her. And soon after, the boy raised his blade, asking the officer what she knew about the ghostly scythe. The girl evaded, saying that she knew too little. She was created by an anonymous leader during the last millennium. Although at first it consisted only of himself and the 13 apostles, it was they who took responsibility for what happened at the Allendale station. Since then, they've started hiring more people, and she still doesn't understand how they managed to grow so much. As the duel continued, Kieran suggested that she would be surprised at what people were willing to believe when they were starving. They said their goal was to create a better world, one where there was no social hierarchy. That sounds pretty tempting when you weren't born a noble. Anyway, the guy said that now the number of apostles has been reduced to 7, only 4 of which are the surviving pioneers. The rest were either killed or committed suicide, and it seemed that not all of them needed replacement. Having dodged, our heroine decided to strike from below, and also asked how many people are in the ghostly scythe now. Kieran jumped up and said there were hundreds, but it was hard to say exactly how many. He told her to spill what else she knew, because if that was all the police knew, it was worse than he thought. Lauren jumped up, saying that the first overt act of Phantom Scythe terrorism was the bombing at the train station on November 13th. The city was the site of the opening of a new railway, financed by the late King Edward. It was he who died in the explosion, along with many representatives of the government and nobility. While precisely attacking Kieran, who dodged it with equal ease, Lauren added that there were 243 fatalities in the disaster. Immediately after that, she continued to strike with more aggression and speed, and also said that there were 328 wounded. But suddenly, she stopped, saying that 176 people had simply disappeared at that station. Taking advantage of the fact that the girl stopped, Kieran suddenly made a dash towards her and grabbed her. A moment later, he sat on top of her and told her that she didn't need to be distracted. He explained that if she couldn't finish telling him what she knew, then it would simply make no sense for him to tell her about his lead. The girl looked away, saying that she was distracted, and therefore asked for forgiveness for this. Kieran suddenly asked to try not to fall asleep, as he will fight the hired killer next time. Our heroine at that moment decided that she didn't really like staying on the floor, so she thanked him for such good advice, but he also needed to take care of himself. At that very moment, the girl kicked him, but Kieran managed to block the attack. The guy smiled, looking at her, and said that she shouldn't act so quickly. However, soon after these words, the girl twisted his arm, causing him to drop the knife, and also grabbed his leg with hers. As a result, after just a couple of seconds, our heroine was sitting on him, pinning him to the ground. Kieran immediately smiled, saying that for an officer, she was fighting pretty well. Lauren told him that putting him on his back was something of a stress reliever for her. Although, by the way, it is not important, It is worth continuing. It was known that a certain group of rebels was being formed, but there were other rumors. Many thought they were trying to blow up a castle rather than a railway station, so the police turned all their efforts to the wrong place, declaring their opposition to the monarchy. With this, the ghostly scythe made it clear that they would grow in power in the shadows until they could topple the crown and the class hierarchy upon which it rested. Soon the girl stood up with Kieran and told him to get up. The guy in turn laughed, saying that all these words are actually quite touching, aren't they? At least those that are set out in the official version, of course, considering that the leader is a mystery to everyone, and no one knows his real plans. Justice, the thirst for revenge, the possibility of creating a better world, all this lured the desperate into it. Money and power held them back and attracted the increasingly depraved. Lauren decided to assume that he joined them because killing was his secret passion. Kieran smiled, saying that if they started talking about wicked desires, the conversation would drag on much longer. But in any case, he asked her not to worry, because she was not one of those he needed. Still, the girl realized that he was calling her for the next round, so she decided to act. Starting to spin, Lauren asked how anyone could believe that blowing up a station and killing hundreds of innocent people could be the beginning of building a better world. However, within a moment, the guy was behind them, saying that half of the members of the Ghost Scythe didn't care, and the other half believed that it was necessary. By the way, at this moment, the guy decided to remind her that she was already a corpse, judging by their battle. Our heroine was shocked, which is why she decided to ask in bewilderment how he did it. At that moment, Kieran swung his blade and threw it at the target with incredible accuracy. He smiled and added that if she wanted to survive the small partnership, she would have to visit the department's training room more often. Even though it was annoying her, she still sighed heavily and decided to ask Kieran what he knew about the leader. The guy replied that he had been investigating for many years, but he was as stumped as she was. But he knew that the leader carefully thought out each of the murders he ordered. There is a specific reason behind the murder of each person she is sent to kill. Often, they are either close to the royal family or supporters of it. Of course, there were also options for who wanted to betray the ghostly scythe. Lauren suddenly decided to assume that the apostles were closest to the leader, so the best way to find him was to deal with them. It seems to her that if anyone knows about his true identity, it must be one of the 4 surviving true apostles. Taking the knife, the guy twirled it on his finger, saying that the problem was that these guys were also classified. Now that was very unpleasant to hear. The girl asked in bewilderment how they even work. The guy replied that while they were much easier to identify than the leader himself, each of them had some sort of territory or a certain type of task that they were responsible for. Lauren then suggested that in order to figure out the head of the operation, they needed to start with the people at the very bottom. At that moment, Kieran clenched his blade and said that they actually already had a lead. A moment later, he threw his knife, which landed squarely on the head of one of the guys in the photo. Lauren turned her head angrily, saying that if he did that again, she would kill him. Kieran replied that he knew that there was an illegal weapons import network currently operating that was linked to the Ghost Scythe, and that they were under the direction of the 7th Apostle. He is one of 13 co-founders. Among the people potentially involved, he singled out Gregory McTrevor, who was previously charged with illegal arms trafficking. Kieran had been keeping an eye on him for some time now, and was honestly surprised that the leader hadn't ordered him to finish him off yet. Lauren replied that she had heard about him. He had been arrested several times, and she had even done it herself. He asked for a lawyer and got away with it, insisting that there was no evidence. The guy suddenly said that Gregory is far from being the most skilled person, because he thinks that he works cleanly, but in fact he leaves traces, so their first target will be him. Kieran offered to pay him a short visit and find out more about the matter, but he had to make sure he couldn't report back afterwards. Lauren just couldn't believe she was about to say this. But why not just kill him after they were done? Kieran's expression changed at that moment, as if he was puzzled by what she was saying. The girl explained, reminding that the purple hyacinth is the most terrifying killer in the entire city. In his defense, Kieran said that he only kills when he is ordered to, or when it is the only way out. They will find another way to neutralize Gregory. Lauren was obviously very surprised by Kieran's answer, as she didn't expect him to have any principles. Anyway, the girl smiled and said that she had a plan that they could use. In any case, the next morning, the action takes us to the Ardalis police station. Our heroine, although she had acquired a new companion, still had to fulfill her duties, so she dealt with paperwork. The girl was so fixated on work and her thoughts that she didn't notice anything around her. Just at that very moment, Kim, who was carrying documents and drinking coffee, began to walk past the girl. As she passed by, Lauren didn't even glance or respond in any way. She was still fixated on the documents. This surprised Kim a little, which is why she couldn't just leave without talking to her friend. Taking advantage of the fact that Lauren was now lost in space, the girl quietly crept up to her. As soon as she had reduced their distance as much as possible, the girl whispered her friend's name in her ear. At that moment, our heroine almost jumped up in shock, but at the same time screamed loudly. The girl slapped the table in bewilderment and asked him to stop sneaking up on her, because she swears that she might accidentally hit her if she continues to do this. Kim suddenly started talking about how her lovely golden eyes looked just... Lauren suddenly screamed and stopped it. No doubt she remembered her own words to the lieutenant. In any case, the girl decided to ask what Lauren was doing yesterday instead of sleeping. Our heroine asked in surprise what she was talking about. Kim responded that Sinclair looked like someone sat a corpse at her desk and slapped a wig on it. Our heroine was undoubtedly surprised by her friend's fantasy, which is why she couldn't hide her puzzled look. The girl laughed in turn, saying that it was typical of Lauren. In any case, she asked again what she was doing. Our heroine, after thinking for a bit, said that a lot had simply fallen on her, but there was nothing to worry about. Okay, we dealt with one person, but... At that moment, William started walking past them. The guy was just as devastated as Lauren at first glance. Kim cried out in bewilderment, asking if he was there too. What had happened to him? Soon, she asked if they had both decided to go to hell without her that night. For some reason, she had the feeling that she had missed something. At that moment, William said in a heavy voice that a lot had fallen on him too. Taking a sip of coffee, Kim simply turned around and said that they were just regular drama kings. Soon after, our heroine was again sitting and doing paperwork, thinking about her own things. The action moves to Captain Herman, to whom one of the workers approached and handed over a document, saying that it was for him. The guy immediately went about his business, and the captain decided to quickly read what was inside. A few moments later, he jumped out and started catching up with the guy who handed him the document. Coming closer, Herman asked in bewilderment who had given him this document. The guy looked at the captain in surprise and said that he didn't know who it was from, because it had just been lying on his cart since the morning. Herman looked down, thinking about what he should do. A few moments later, the man headed for the stairs, because he had an idea. He found another friend of his, to whom he approached and handed over the document. Soon the action moves back to the office, where the perplexed captain shows that very document, asking whose work it is. Naturally, all the guys looked at each other in bewilderment and shrugged their shoulders. Lucas, as always, did not even show signs of life, and only justified the status of a grumpy cat, and our heroine raised her head in surprise, tearing herself away from the documents. Herman continued shouting, saying that it was definitely someone from the office, because no one else had access to the archive secretary's cart. The investigative committee did not send him. Kim looked at the captain in surprise, saying that it didn't look like it was one of them. Maybe someone from the previous shift left it? One way or another, the girl decided to ask what it was, when suddenly that same assistant Herman said that these were documents from the Gregory McTrevor case. At that moment, Lucas asked in surprise if this was the same merchant that the investigative committee was trying to put the squeeze on. The man nodded his head and said that this was true, and apparently this document was the missing piece they needed to finally put him away. The cabinet immediately exclaimed in bewilderment. Our heroine also asked what it meant. The man told her that his guys had spent months digging up dirt on him, but to no avail. If this envelope proves the truth, then they had done a hell of a job. Lauren asked in surprise if there were any clues in these documents, or perhaps a signature or a handwritten fragment. Herman replied that there was none of that there. Everything was printed, even the fancy little cover letter. Anyway, the captain said that he wanted the best specialists to analyze these documents and check everything. It may look convincing, but he did not believe it. However, Kim is one of the few who decided to take an interest in what the letter actually said. Taking the document out of the folder, the man began to read the letter until it seemed. The sender greeted the officers. The action takes us to a slightly different place, namely to the place where this letter was created. It was stated that in this folder, they would find everything they needed to finally send Gregory McTrevor behind bars. This letter was in Lauren's hands. The folder contained every crime he committed, the names of his accomplices, evidence of their payments. Everything was laid out in order. The sender provided instructions on how to find evidence that could not fit into this envelope. The police had a day to check all this in accordance with what they already knew about Gregory. Also, regarding his arrest, they can find McTrevor at 23 Palmore Street. But most importantly, they must be there on November 15th at exactly 23:11. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. It is imperative that the contents of this envelope remain a secret until that time, for the ghostly scythe has eyes and ears everywhere. If its contents are made public or leaked, the entire operation could be at risk, and they in turn will miss their only chance to stop Gregory McTrevor. Our heroine at that moment happily drank coffee and smiled. Herman soon finished reading the letter and assumed that the author valued his art of dramatization very highly. This was both funny and arrogant. It was at this very moment that our heroine, in bewilderment, even spat out the coffee she had just drunk. The assistant captain suddenly said that, judging by what he saw in this folder, he could tell that this was the work of a professional. Presumably, it would have to be someone who is clearly aware of our investigation into McTrevor. Lieutenant Hawks thought for a moment, and soon asked if there was a signature. At that moment, the captain sighed heavily, and said that there really was a signature here. A certain sender calls himself Loon, which further confuses the investigation. Anyway, the action takes us to the evening. The shift was finally over, so everyone was going home, and Hawks was praising everyone, saying that they did a good job on patrol. The man who took over the investigation of the letter said that they analyzed the contents of the folder, and everything was correct. To be honest, he had never seen anything like it. However, no one at the police station could do this. Lauren suddenly asked, what if this was a trap set by someone from the Ghost Scythe or someone closely connected to its members? Herman suddenly said that Sinclair was right. He would not allow this criminal Loon to dictate the actions of the police station. He could not collect all this legally. The man suddenly said that he had been working on the McTrevor case for 5 years. Everyone knew he was a criminal. His fortune protected him. But this time, there wouldn't be enough gold in the world. Williams suddenly added that it could be a trap, but they were police officers. They knew he was guilty of everything he was accused of, and they had everything they needed to arrest him tonight. It is their duty to take all subsequent measures in this regard. Herman nodded his head and agreed that he should be arrested, but now. However, the guy from the investigative committee said that he wanted to wait until the time indicated by the moon. Herman asked in confusion why he wanted to follow his instructions. The man replied that Loon was right about everything. There must be a reason why he chose a specific time. Wouldn't it be wiser to follow that? They might catch him in the act. At that moment, the captain did not understand why everything had to be done so hard, and why he had to dodge. But, sighing, Herman allowed his time to be spent as he wished, so he ordered March to assemble a team. Soon after, he headed for the exit, tired from today and the brainstorming. However, he soon stopped and added that the matter must remain strictly confidential until the investigation was completed, until McTrevor is behind bars or back home in his bed. He also asked if they understood him. Also, when approaching March, the captain said that this envelope did not just flutter into the mail cart. Someone had to put it there, and he wanted to find that person. The action shifts to late at night, when a man walked down a dark corridor towards a door that was slightly open. Although it was a little strange, he still decided to go inside, so he began to slowly open the door. At this time, there were 2 unknown individuals inside, who soon raised their heads and greeted him. The guy instantly became very tense and was about to start screaming at the top of his voice, but the uninvited guests reacted quickly and also immediately closed his mouth. After just a few moments, they tied him up and secured him securely in one place. The man tried to break free, which caused him to move actively from side to side. But one attacker suddenly stepped on his foot, thereby stopping his behavior. Kieran shook his head, indicating that he should be quieter and that it was not very polite of him to hit a lady in the face. Holding Gregory's head, he assumed that his manners would be much better. Lauren sighed in bewilderment at this point and said that this was literally the first thing he did when he met her. Anyway, Kieran turned to their prisoner and said that he would now remove his hand and that Gregory should not scream. The man shouted in confusion and asked what they wanted. Money? They should name a price and they could settle everything peacefully. But our heroine, in response to his pathetic attempts to pay off, said that they did not want to deal with his dirty money. Gregory began to twitch even more in his chair, asking why he was tied to the chair at all in that case. Kieran smiled and quoted him, saying that there was no need to resort to any horrors. They just wanted him to cooperate and answer a few questions. So at that very moment, Lauren gestured to Kieran and indicated that they should move away. The boys went to a quieter place, while Gregory asked in confusion what they wanted and who they were. However, they did not react in any way and moved on, which made the guy even more nervous, asking the robbers to tell him what they wanted. Soon our heroine, perplexed, said that Kieran should not harm him. The guy looked at her in surprise and asked what would happen otherwise, or let her tell him how she planned to get at least a word out of the hostage. Lauren assured her partner that if he even touched him, she would do to him exactly the same thing that he did to him, and she would do it with pleasure. Kieran sighed heavily, saying that they, the police, have stupid rules. And yet, the guy reached out to McTrevor and said they had recently become interested in his illicit off-duty interactions with the followers of the Ghost Scythe. The guy exclaimed in bewilderment and asked what they were even talking about. He would never do such a thing. Our heroine continued to add fuel to the fire. Money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, treason, organizing prostitution networks, illegal arms trafficking, tax evasion. Gregory continued to twitch in his chair, saying that he had no idea what kind of nonsense they were talking about. Of course, our heroine clearly sensed the lie. Kieran suddenly said that he should at least try to use something less hackneyed as an excuse. Gregory suddenly smiled, saying that he was an influential person and even the police could not touch him. So what made them think that this was allowed to them? He advised him to leave while he still had the chance. Lauren said they would never stop watching him. Even if he had escaped conviction in the past, money would not help. Kieran chimed in, saying that was true. So in that case, he suggested skipping the death threats, as they were always so boring. Moreover, the guy said that he is already fed up with them from someone, whatever. He wants Gregory to tell more about the operation he is working on now. Kieran assumed it was an illegal trade. He was smuggling weapons into Ardalis, no doubt for some even more nefarious purpose. Gregory in turn began to laugh, asking what they would do if he said he knew nothing about it. Kieran was losing control, because he definitely didn't like the direction of their communication. But he also remembered the promise to Lauren. In any case, the guy still decided to take the blade out of his pocket, asking if they should play a game. Every time Gregory lies to them, he will poke him with this perfectly sharp knife. Kieran came right up to the man and said that the conditions were that whoever laughed first would win. Lauren, who was exploring the room, still heard those words, so she instantly became angry, because if he dared to do that, then Gregory suddenly started laughing, asking if they really thought they could scare him with a knife. He had been through a lot of interrogations, and if torture had worked, he wouldn't be here. However, Kieran replied that they already knew about his involvement in this case, so there was no point in denying it. It was better to cooperate, and perhaps they would allow his loved ones to live a little longer. And still the guy started saying that they had no information on him. He lives alone, is not married, has no children. He can't blackmail him because he only cares about himself. Kieran brought the blade a little closer and asked what about his eyes. It would be a shame if he accidentally poked one out. Lauren at this point asked Kieran in bewilderment what he was doing, reminding him of the agreement. In turn, the guy asked not to interfere with his work, because this is his favorite part. Kieran smiled and said that Gregory was super pathetic. He worked under the seventh apostle, right? Gregory, confused, said that it wasn't so, and then asked who it was. Kieran immediately poked him in the eye. Soon he cried out, saying that his hand had accidentally slipped. And what is his job? And again the guy said he didn't know. And again Kieran poked him in the eye. Kieran shook his head, assuming that someone wanted to get stabbed again. Did he really like that? Our heroine didn't like this at all, which is why she decided to teach Kieran a lesson. The girl immediately reached for the bookshelf, took one of the books, and simply threw it towards Kieran. However, the guy seemed to have a sixth sense, which caused him to duck sharply, and the book flew into Gregory's head, not Kieran's. Our heroine at that very moment said a very awkward, "Oops!" The aim definitely let her down a little. In turn, Kieran began to just laugh out loud at what had just happened. However, Gregory soon shouted, asking them to stop. If they've done their research, they should know he's just a trader and accountant. He's just regulating transactions for him, legitimate transactions. Kieran started nodding his head, asking with whose help he was doing this. The guy replied that he had been a merchant in this city for 13 years, which is why he did not need anyone's help. Kieran told him that he seemed to have misunderstood the question, which prompted him to ask again how he received orders from the apostle. Gregory replied that he had received them through letters, each of which was to be immediately burned after being read. It was at this moment, while Kieran was interrogating the hostage, that our heroine was still able to stumble upon something interesting. Kieran suddenly turned to Gregory and asked why they actually needed the weapon. Gregory replied that if they were familiar with the scythe, they should know that no one tells anyone anything. No one gives the big picture of what's going on except the apostles and the leader. The ghost scythe keeps making promises, but they haven't done anything significant in all these years. He's willing to bet that weapon is headed back out of the country, perhaps as part of some silly fundraising campaign to finance the apostles' new mansion. That's probably a bit much for those who scream about equality, isn't it? Kieran smiled and said that he was undoubtedly right and was happy to talk. At this moment, our heroine took some documents and put them in her pocket. After that, she went to Kieran and said that the break was over, so she asked to let her work now. Gregory sighed, saying that was good. But what now? More books thrown at his head? He assured that he had already said everything he knew. Our heroine at that moment told him that she had no doubt that he had been through many interrogations. At that very moment, she placed a chair right next to him, and yet he had never been interrogated by her, so she suggested he start. It would be worth starting with the lies he had spewed to her partner when he played detective. First of all, he wasn't just responsible for making deals. Plus, he wasn't doing it alone. He was in close contact with other people, including the seventh apostle, but he did not receive a letter from him. She is sure that he did not risk meeting him in person and did not call, and he did not want to leave traces. Therefore, he probably used an intermediary to transmit oral messages, that is, a person with whom he would sooner or later have to meet. Kieran at this time leaned back on the chair and began to watch the girl's work in surprise. Gregory became very tense at this point, which is why he began to ask how she knew all this. Lauren interrupted him and said that she could read his mind, his deepest, most hidden secrets and desires, so he could not hide anything from her. The guy started stuttering and saying that he couldn't believe this nonsense. Our heroine laughed and said that he had just lied again. He was afraid that she was actually afraid of it. Gregory replied that he could consider himself infinite, but at the same time, she certainly would not be able to. Lauren interrupted him again and said that he had lied about his children earlier. Did he really have someone he cared about? Taking out the picture, she said that he was not married, and there were no children living under his roof, which meant the child must have been born out of wedlock. Gregory immediately tensed up, realizing that now he wouldn't be able to hide everything completely. Lauren said there was no need to confirm that he was a bastard. She didn't care. It was better not to waste time arguing, since they had already come to an understanding. The guy started screaming and declaring that he had no idea who it was. Presumably, it was one of the seventh apostle's files. Lauren sighed and said that he could lie as much as he wanted, but they would find this child and then, well, he probably knew what would happen. Unless, of course, he tells them about his dealings with the ghostly scythe. Kieran smiled at this point, glad that, as expected, she had proven useful. The girl stood over Gregory and asked the question again. What was his role in working for the seventh apostle? The guy understood that he was cornered and had nowhere to go. He oversees the import of weapons and runs a cover business. They make everything look legal. Others make sure there are no clues left. The girl was glad that they found a common language, so she now asked him to name the people he works with, as well as their responsibilities. He soon named Harry Anslow and Ryan Flemings. They are the only ones he has crossed paths with, but he has no idea who the other members are. They used each other as alibis to cover up the deals. Lauren suddenly asked, what about the deals themselves? What was the purpose of the apostle? If not to raise funds, then what was it for? After thinking for a moment, our heroine suggested that they were supposed to be for some kind of rebellion. Gregory began to deny it, saying that he swears that he doesn't know anything else. Lauren sighed heavily again, asking him not to test it, because she had already told him what could happen. Gregory reluctantly said that 10 years ago the leader promised them to create a better world, a world free from the tyranny of kings, and she was right. Weapons for the imminent revolution in the city. The time must soon begin when the people of Ardalis will take power into their own hands. The girl began to rise, saying that telling the truth is not so difficult. Gregory immediately shouted, asking what she and her subordinate were planning. Kieran shouted in confusion, asking who the subordinate was. Could he be talking about him? Lauren laughed at this point, telling Kieran that the nickname actually suited him. Kieran was baffled that he was the one who suggested the deal. He actually hired her. And yet, the girl asked to look at how useless he was today, more like an amateur. The purple hyacinth asked in bewilderment what she would have achieved if it weren't for him. She would still be sitting there crying with a broken nose. The guy continued to say in panic that she would have just run into all those blank walls that her investigation kept running into. Lauren asked, confused, what sobbing meant. She sighed and said it was the boldest thing she had ever heard. The guys immediately started arguing among themselves, not even paying attention to Gregory. The guy suddenly said that if they were both busy arguing, then maybe they could let him go. The guys suddenly turned around, simultaneously telling him that he should sit still. Lauren soon asked him if he had any records of past fraudulent transactions, or at least interactions with his friends from the spit, that could be used as an alibi. Pointing to the cabinet, the girl suggested that perhaps they were there, but Gregory replied that he did not keep records. In that case, she pointed to another box, assuming that it was there, but Gregory still said that it was not there. Over and over again he screamed, saying that he had absolutely nothing and he told them so. Just noticing how violently he reacted to one of the boxes, the girl opened it and saw documents inside. Lauren suddenly laughed, telling her favorite gullible subordinate that they seemed to have hit the jackpot. It was a real treasure, which had a stamp from the ghostly scythe on it, as well as a concluded deal. Kieran sighed heavily, but decided to ignore the insults, saying that they were also running out of time. The police will be here in a few minutes to arrest Gregory, and they have everything they need to put him away for the next 20 years. Unfortunately, Gregory can't do anything about it, because the evidence is irrefutable, which means all he can do is have fun. Lauren also took the documents. Still, she said that if he wanted the boy to live, she'd better cooperate with them and keep her mouth shut about what happened tonight. But there is also one last thing. When the police ask, he must inevitably say that he saw 2 men. Soon after these words were spoken, the sounds of a siren began to be heard, which meant only that it was time. And so, finally, the 2 criminals began to flee the scene of the crime, wishing Gregory a wonderful time in hell. At this time, a whole squad of police ran out of the car, and taking up arms, ran inside. A few moments later, they were inside, looking at Gregory McTrevor tied up in front of them. And so, finally, the next day arrives, and that means the next working day. Our heroine walked down the hallway, thinking that she couldn't believe it worked. First of all, she didn't believe she had made a deal. But what's even crazier is that this is a deal with the city's most vile criminal. She didn't know if she'd ever stop beating herself up about it. Lauren knew full well that if the police found out, she'd better be the first. But still, the deal was done, and it might work out even better than she imagined. Either way, there is no turning back. But the worst thing about it all wasn't just that. As soon as the girl entered the office, she was immediately greeted joyfully by the secretary. Kim, meanwhile, was still making fun of Hawks early in the morning, but still said hello to her friend. What hurt Lauren more was that she simply didn't know how long she would have to lie to them. The secretary at this point asked in surprise if what they had said was true. Had McTrevor really been arrested? The guy told her that he was found tied to a chair in his own office, which meant that it looked like Loon had paid him a little visit before they arrived. Lucas also added that Detective March said he had never seen Gregory so scared before. At that moment, the guy even got excited about the whole thing, and although he didn't know what Loon had done to him, the show was probably amazing. Lila was a little tense from a certain piece of madness on Lucas's part, but still decided to ask who this Loon was. The lieutenant also asked in surprise how he had succeeded in doing what a dozen detectives had failed to do. Kim, at this point, asked in bewilderment if he was joking, because it was just fantastic. This is probably a former member of the ghostly Scythe trying to atone for his guilt. A new secret informant. The girl guessed that there must be a couple of brave spies among their ranks. Only one of them could know so much about the operations of the ghost Scythe. Lauren tensed a little, hoping that Kim would stop being smart as soon as possible. Officer Harvey at this point assumed that Loon was a competitor in the trade, cooperating with the Scythe. They had been collecting all the information for years and finally decided to leak it. Kim immediately screamed that he was right. He must be hiding behind an alias because of the shady dealings he was involved in order to get the arms contract. The lieutenant sighed heavily, saying that in any case, that dossier was the work of a specialist, and he heard how the guys from the investigative committee discussed it. Moreover, they even looked for fingerprints on the documents, but there is nothing that could indicate his identity. Lucas, you could say, admired this guy because he was really careful, which meant he knew for sure that they would look for clues that would give him away. At this point, Lila asked the boys in surprise why they were so excited. Because it was wonderful. Thanks to Loon, justice had finally prevailed. At that moment, a man walked into the room and suggested instead that the whole story was a ploy to distract their attention from something nasty lurking beneath the surface. Loon had yet to show his face, let alone his true intentions. All this means is that it is naive to start idolizing this man so quickly. Naturally, this man was the captain, who soon turned around and greeted his department. After everyone had said hello back, the lieutenant asked what they knew about Loon so far. What did McTrevor say? Herman replied that the detective was with him now, but the only thing they managed to get out of him was that Loon was supposedly a two-man team. All the guys were surprised at this moment, because they initially assumed that he was working alone. Our heroine, in turn, decided to ask if there were any other suspicions. Is there anything they can help the investigation department with? The man said they would discuss all their actions separately. That was what he wanted to talk about. They needed the public to be fascinated by this masked vigilante. This information must be considered top secret until the investigation is completed. Then they will work on the official statement. Our heroine at this point asked in surprise what would happen to McTrevor. Could the evidence provided by Looney be used in court? The man replied that their work certainly complemented what they already had. Each file had been a serious effort, and Detective March believed they could copy everything in time. Therefore, before the hearing, they will do everything and provide the dossier. Tomorrow, Gregory will appear in court and face all the charges from which he has been running away all these past years. Under normal circumstances, further investigation would be required before Loon's work could actually be considered evidence. However, the investigative department reproduced and rechecked all the evidence. This means that the judge's final decision will likely be delayed until they establish Loon's identity. Meanwhile, McTrevor will undoubtedly be jailed and face his punishment. But whoever or whatever Loon is, he can't hide in the shadows for long. He won't tolerate being played by some coward hiding behind a mask. The captain declared that if he was half as clever as he pretended to be, he must realize that his patience was at its limit and that the whole crime would not be overlooked. Herman promised that he would make the capture of this individual his personal mission and put him behind bars for all the good he did. Soon the working day was coming to an end, and the guys finally left the station. Kim began to stretch, saying that she was incredibly tired. However, she also had a very important offer. The girl offered the guys a watermelon. William sighed heavily and said in bewilderment that this woman was simply fickle. And yet, at that moment, all three of them stood up in surprise and looked forward. In front of them, they saw a woman who seemed to be in real grief. She was perplexed and asked where her handsome butler had gone, because she missed him. What should she do? What if something terrible had happened to him? Our heroine immediately decided to run to her to find out how they could help. The woman also started running towards him, making it clear that she definitely needed help. Lauren, coming closer, greeted Milady and asked how she could help her. Only now, in the same bitter tears, the woman ran past the girl and moved on. She pounced on William, asking him to help her, because she was so desperate that she didn't know what to do. The guy, perplexed, said that they would help her. But what was the matter? He asked who she was looking for. The woman was sobbing heavily and raising her eyes to look at the lieutenant, when suddenly she turned completely red. She was attracted by the guy's eyes, which were more beautiful than the sky and the sea themselves. Immediately, all her problems faded into the background, which is why she began to look at him with loving eyes. At that moment, the guy looked away in embarrassment, because he felt very awkward. The woman suddenly came to her senses and, smiling, asked him to forgive her, because she was simply blinded by his magnificent beauty. Lauren at this point approached Kim, trying to contain her laughter, but her friend was only too happy for an extra reason to laugh with Hawk's. And yet, the woman suddenly said that Hawk's beauty was not even close to that of her dear master butler, and again she began to scream, clutching at the lieutenant. She missed him madly and wondered where he could be. Lauren was still holding on with all her might, but she even started shaking from laughter. But Kim got into the swing of it and was rocking on the ground, laughing at the situation. The guy at this point, perplexed, told them that if they found this situation so funny, then she would be responsible for this matter and all the paperwork associated with it. The girl rose to her feet, saying that she would gladly carry out the order of her lieutenant, who was not even close to such a beauty. Kim soon asked what had happened to her butler. The woman hugged William even tighter, saying that it all started a couple of days ago, when some tramps were running around on her roof in the middle of the night. She was very scared. However, her handsome, sweet, and brave butler had calmed her down, but now he had simply disappeared. What if it was the purple hyacinth trampling on her roof? Or maybe it was Loon, the one everyone was talking about? There were two of them. One of them seemed to be much lighter than the other. Maybe it was even a woman. The woman, perplexed, began to ask what if the purple hyacinth even had a partner? At that very moment, the guys froze and looked at each other, because there could be some meaning in this. And yet, our heroine suggested that perhaps one of the two men was simply very skinny. Anyway, my lady screamed, asking what if those uncouth monsters had kidnapped her brilliant Mr. Butler. Kim, at that moment, took out a notebook and asked when she had last seen him. The woman replied that they were on their way to an appointment, and when they turned the corner, he simply disappeared. She cried huge tears, suddenly saying that 10 whole minutes had already passed, and he was nowhere to be found. At that very moment, a silence hung between them, which made them want to just run away. Holding back her laughter, Kim promised that they would take this matter seriously. The woman continued to cry, slapping Hawks across the face and saying that she was desperate beyond measure. She had to be at an appointment at 7 o'clock. What time was it anyway? William suddenly removed the woman's hand, and in a desperate voice told Kim that she always carried a pocket watch with her, so she could answer this question. However, the girl turned away in embarrassment, saying that she had forgotten this watch today. She woke up in a hurry this morning, and still the girl said that there was no need to worry, because she had everything under control. Running up and standing under the sun's rays, she began to do various manipulations. Her whole appearance showed her efforts to find out the time. At this time, our heroine laughed to herself, thinking that this Kim, as always, behaved like Kim. Hawks exclaimed in bewilderment, asking what she was doing. Was she trying to get to heaven, or was she crawling through the air? Was she imitating a raccoon? Well, if you think about it a little, you can really notice some similarities. The girl told him to shut up, saying that she was trying to tell time by the sun using this pose, and that she should concentrate. The guy began to grumble again in bewilderment, already looking a little like Lucas. Lauren was already completely losing the essence of what was happening here and where it was all heading. However, at that moment, the saving voice of a man was heard, addressing Lady Arthingham. At that very moment, their eyes met. The woman at that very moment ran to her handsome butler. She assumed she had lost him forever. The man also started running towards her. After a few moments, they finally hugged each other, as if they hadn't seen each other for ages, and what's more, they began to cry with joy. Our heroes, watching this, were, to put it mildly, surprised by what was happening. The woman suddenly said that her souls were crying at the thought of never again being rubbed with fragrant cream. The man replied that he would never abandon her feet, his beloved elegant lady. Soon after, the couple in love went on about their business, and the guys were still trying to come to their senses. After a short pause, Kim decided to lighten the mood by saying that the case seemed to be closed, which meant the question about watermelons remained relevant. The guys immediately slapped themselves in the face because they were still in shock from what was happening, and then Kim joined in with her watermelons. The girls sighed heavily, saying that they should go and celebrate this matter. The boy followed them in confusion, saying that he didn't want to eat watermelons again. Lauren smiled and asked Will not to spoil all the fun. At that moment, our heroine approached her friend and asked her to let her guess. After a couple of seconds, she guessed that it was in the back pocket on the right. The girl smiled and assumed it was about her watch. It wasn't fair, and she wasn't going to play that game with her. But even if she was lying, she would know it. Turning to Hawks, she advised Grandpa to hurry, or they would leave him behind. Soon the action moves into late evening, when the sun was already setting over the horizon. At this time, someone was still awake and was at the shooting range, presumably practicing their skills. As you might guess, it was Kim, who was only too happy to shoot, even before going to bed. Soon the girl pulled the trigger, and a shot was fired that hit the target right on target. She fired again and again, still shooting perfectly on target, without even missing. As soon as the clip ran out of bullets, she simply threw it away and inserted a new one. After that, another series of shots followed, and in her head there was only one date. November 14th. The continuous shooting created a huge hole in the target, and yet one bullet went in the wrong direction. The girl snorted and turned her head away, because her skill was not yet as perfect as she wanted to be. Soon after, she began to think about that very day again, and then took out her pocket watch. Looking at them, she soon squeezed them, wishing that time could be turned back. Meanwhile, our heroine was sitting at the typewriter and diligently typing something. At this time, Kieran was also busy with an important task. He was spinning his blade and examining the board, trying to put together their evidence. The guy suddenly said that they needed to act quickly before the other jesters found out about McTrevor and realized that they would be next. He also asked if the detectives suspected Lauren. The girl replied that she had taken all necessary precautions. Kieran, however, said it was never too late to change careers. She could have been a damn good criminal if she had wanted to. Lauren sighed heavily, speaking of being told this by the greatest killer in the city. She wasn't sure if she should be flattered or scared. The guy took the document in his hands and asked if it was by chance praise now. Well, his heart is fluttering. Lauren soon said she would be happy to stop him for Kieran. And yet, with all the evidence and paperwork gathered, she thought they had everything they needed on Harry Anslow. Kieran, in turn, said that he also looked into Ryan Fleming's, and that he has been traveling outside the city for some time now. And yet, he works at a bank and has a side job altering and erasing traces of illegal money transfers, including those from the fake McTrevor company. To sum it up, our heroine said that this is a cover for weapons operations. In any case, what was interesting now was something else. What would their plan be this time? The guy replied that he had been following Anslow for a few days, and that he would be at Golden Clover tomorrow at 10 o'clock, according to his schedule. It would be possible to search his house before meeting him there. Lauren suddenly said that the captain was convinced that he knew what he was doing. Herman would definitely come early and ambush them if they tried to tell when and where to arrest someone. Kieran responded that the captain's arrogance was their best weapon, as he thought they would be stupid enough to use the same strategy twice. This is just a perfect scenario. The guy immediately broke into a smile, saying that they would send them the wrong address. He would leave another letter there with real instructions on where to arrest Anslow. This little detour would give them time to kidnap and interrogate him. The girl turned around in bewilderment and asked what it meant to interrogate him. Kieran laughed and said that she didn't seem bothered when they tied Gregory up. So what's the difference? Apart from it not being his house. They're not going to dismember him. He explained that they just needed a nice, quiet place where she could use her psychic powers to scare the hell out of him. Our heroine looked at him in surprise and soon apologized, saying that this time he would be the only one asking questions. She can't talk if they want to stick to the description of the two men. Her voice will give her away, but she'll signal him every time he lies. At this point, Kieran said he was curious about how she knew when someone was lying. At first, he thought she had an unusually useful talent, but it seemed more like something paranormal. The guy soon fell silent, and after a few seconds, asked who taught her this. Lauren froze just as quickly. Squeezing her hand, the girl said that no one taught her this, and she always had this ability. And yet the guy still wanted to know how the lie detector works. Lauren replied that she just knew the answers, that's all. Kieran asked her not to be so shy, as he was looking forward to her explanation. The girl hung her head down and said that she couldn't explain it, but it worked and had never let her down. In any case, she soon rose from her chair, saying that they should finish this dossier and get out of here. His cave is damp, and it also stinks. But these words were already very offensive, so the guy exclaimed in bewilderment. However, the action takes us to the streets of an evening city that has not slept. In a small alley stood a man in a robe, whose face was not visible, but another man approached him. Kieran smiled and greeted the officer, asking if she was ready for their date. The girl sighed heavily. It seemed she would never miss his silly humor. In any case, she asked if he had found anything at Anslow. Kieran replied that it was only a little. Unfortunately, he was not as stupid as McTrevor, and he was capable of more than just hiding the tracks of the deals in his office. Our heroine in this case decided to hurry, because they didn't have much time before the police got here. But just when Lauren was already gaining speed, the guy suddenly stopped her. Kieran asked the officer to slow down. Was she trying to scare off all the bourgeois here with overpriced drinks and small talk? The theme of the evening is rich merchants with inflated egos, not suspicious-looking alleyway killers. Our heroine smiled at him and said that he was extremely precise, and she had almost forgotten. At the same moment, the girl threw off her cloak, showing how she had managed to transform herself. Kieran was speechless at this point, because he didn't expect to see Lauren so dressed up. The guy smiled, telling her that she was certainly stylish, although it might not be very practical if it got too hot in there. At that moment, our heroine lifted her dress and showed that she had a pistol fastened to her leg. So Officer Sinclair told him not to worry, because she had brought a couple of friends with her to help them out. After this, the girl adjusted her suit and suggested that it was time for them to go. The purple hyacinth smiled and extended his hand to her, asking if he had ever danced with the devil under the moon. Lauren extended her hand to him in response, and as she walked away, she said that she hoped he was a very good dancer. The action takes us back some time. In the afternoon, a guy came into the captain's office. The man was calmly drinking his morning coffee, but at that moment, the guy put a file on the table. Within a few moments, Herman was in shock, and his cup fell to the ground and broke. And again, the action moves to our heroes. The man greeted the lady and sir, asking if he could take their coats. Lauren began to take off her coat, thanking the butler for being so nice. Kieran then took off his coat and placed the coat, top hat, and cane in the man's hands, thanking him as well. Soon the boys headed inside, and the men standing at the entrance wished them a good evening. Lauren at this point said that earlier she had sneaked in through the back door and done some exploring. She had found a small locked storage room and had set everything up for Anslow. Grabbing her partner's hand, she assured him that no one would disturb them there, but at least they'll be safe until the police get here. At this time, it was quite noisy inside. All the people were chatting, dancing, enjoying drinks. Kieran suddenly asked if their moral officer had barged into the bar. Turning to his love, he said that she never ceased to amaze him. Was she taught this at the police academy, or did she learn it in her spare time? The girl smiled, saying that it wasn't necessary to be good at killing to pick a lock, although the police academy had taught her how to shoot arrogant killers. In any case, she pulled him towards her, saying that they should dance. At that very moment, they joined in the dance, enjoying the music and each other, spinning from side to side. Of course, the main task was not just to spin around, but to analyze the entire area, because they were looking for Anslow. Our heroine looked around and said that among all this hubbub, she had not yet noticed him. Kieran suddenly laughed, asking if she was sure that none of her rich family friends would recognize her here. At that very moment, our heroine looked at her partner and asked how he knew about her family. Leading the dance, Kieran said that she had previously said that she was a Sinclair, and so he realized that she couldn't be poor, especially when Tristan Sinclair was the chief of police. Lauren cried out in bewilderment, saying that he had checked her entire background, and yet she had warned him that if one of them was in danger because of him. The guy didn't even let her finish, saying that the agreement was that they couldn't ask personal questions, which he didn't do, but nothing prevented one of them from spying a little. He asked her not to even mention that the idea of digging into his past had never occurred to him. The girl said that she had not thought about it. His dirty laundry is public knowledge anyway, and she doesn't even want to try to find out more about the skeletons in his closet. The guy said in a sarcastic voice that he was really offended because he thought it would be more exciting for her. After all, working with a seductively dangerous killer is quite a high status. Looking around, Lauren asked her subordinate not to flatter himself, because she had done much more exciting things. One way or another, while they were dancing, the girl still did not see the one she needed to find. The guy suddenly looked at her in surprise and asked her to give an example of such things. She saved old people's wallets? Kieran, despite the conversation, was simultaneously looking for Anslow with his eyes. But just like Lauren, he could not find anyone. Our heroine suddenly said that he would definitely be surprised to find out what she could do with handcuffs. While the guy was shaking his head, he managed to lose the essence of their conversation, which is why he asked in surprise what she was talking about. She leaned closer and said she would do something like the murder arrest performance. At this moment, the girl was still able to see something, but judging by her eyes, she was rather scared. Instantly, she began to twirl with Kieran, leading him in a dance. The guy asked in surprise what she was doing. Our heroine finally turned her head and said that the woman knew her by sight. It was just there that very lady was, together with her wonderful, charming, and handsome butler. Kieran slowly turned his head to look at the couple, and the moment the butler bent his beloved lady, something became noticeable. She literally had a real live bird on her head, which made her stylist's hand worthy of a handshake. The guy laughed, saying that he would like to ask about those with whom she was friends, but decided that it was better for him not to delve into this matter. Our heroine tried to contain her laughter, assuring him that it was not what he thought. At this moment, Kieran lowered his partner down. Our heroine in this position also continued to observe those around her. By a wonderful coincidence, the girl was still able to find the one they needed. A lonely man sat on the sofa and enjoyed a delicious wine while there was a lot of noise around. Lauren stood up and stood incredibly close to Kieran's face, creating an atmosphere that felt like intimacy. One way or another, the girl moved even closer and whispered in his ear that she had found the guy they needed. The girl asked him to wait for her in the corridor that leads to the utility rooms. She would lure him there so that Kieran could knock him out without him noticing. The guy smiled and asked her to grab some Cabernet Sauvignon first. Anslow would definitely like it. The girl didn't understand at first, but at that moment, the guy winked and said that sometimes his surveillance skills come in very handy. Our heroine started walking, laughing as she did so. But now she had to do everything right. After some time, the girl was sitting and drinking wine alone. At this moment, Anslow was also sitting in his place, drinking wine and watching the situation around him, but suddenly, he felt someone's gaze on him and finally caught it. It was a cute girl who was looking at him with embarrassment. The guy immediately smiled at the girl, because he liked her too. But he didn't make any moves. Our heroine soon stood up and walked towards him, clicking her graceful heels. Putting a glass of wine on the table, the girl greeted the handsome man, saying that he looked lonely. Touching him, she admitted that she had been looking at him out of the corner of her eye, and noticed that he, too, could not take his eyes off her. Placing his hand on hers, he decided to admit that her thoughtful eyes had captivated him. Sure, our heroine's head almost exploded from such a stupid compliment, which she was tired of. But in life, she smiled and said that no one knows what dangers are hidden behind beauty. Anslow took the beautiful lady's hand and said that he liked to take risks, and that perhaps she should show him a little more. Our heroine laughed, saying that it was impudent, but still, she even liked it. And yet the man said that he would need to meet someone soon, but the girl assured him that she would quickly cope. A few moments later, they were in the hallway chatting about different things. Lauren suddenly laughed, telling him that he was funny. Anslow said that he enjoyed chatting with her, and that she was so strong, pulling him so hard. Our heroine continued laughing, but at some point she simply stopped, saying that she was a fool because she forgot her purse at the bar. The girl immediately apologized and left Anslow alone, asking him to wait for her there. Our heroine quickly ran away from the guy when suddenly the long-awaited clap was heard. Turning her head, the girl saw Kieran in front of her, who had carried out his part of the plan just as well as she had. Exhaling heavily, she said that if she had been with him another second, she would have thrown up on him from his own cabernet. The action soon takes us to a utility room where a man was already sitting tied up. At this point, ammonium carbonate was placed under his nose, which would bring him back to his senses. Literally, a couple of seconds later, the man woke up and started twitching, wondering what was going on. The guy asked for help. Our heroine pinned him down, and Kieran told him not to worry, saying that they wouldn't spend much time on him. They were actually in a bit of a hurry. Therefore, if he has a desire to live, then they advise him to speak quietly, much more quietly. The guy wasn't going to beat around the bush, so he immediately asked how Anslow was connected to the Ghost Scythe weapons deal and what he knew about the seventh apostle. Harry asked where they were from, but Kieran immediately put his blade to his neck, saying that the faster he answered their questions, the better the chances of his throat staying intact. The guy immediately started screaming that he was just a pawn in this deal, and all he knew was that it would take place, nothing more. Naturally, Kieran raised his head sharply to make sure that what was said was true. At this moment, our heroine showed a cross, making it clear that this was a lie. Kieran sighed heavily and asked why people's first reflex was to lie, even if there was a knife at their throat. Having stuck the blade between his fingers, he suggested that he should use more persuasive methods, such as cutting off a finger or two. Harry suddenly assumed that he was the one who had locked up McTrevor. Kieran was glad that rumors about him were spreading so quickly. He suddenly asked if it would be as fun to torture him as his friend. The guy started begging not to touch him. He would cooperate. He didn't know who was hiding under the mask of the seventh apostle and didn't think anyone knew except the leader. And again, our heroine showed the cross, which means their dear hostage is lying again. However, Kieran didn't even look at his partner and then asked what the purpose of this deal was. The girl began to panic, letting it be known that she was there too. She continued to show the cross. However, the boy continued to assume that all this was for the rebellion. Their leader seemed to him rather daring, doing such things. Harry suddenly said that he joined them because it gave him the opportunity to make easy money and explore the market as a trader. But as for the revolution, it was long overdue. The girl was still trying to remind everyone of herself, and Harry was saying that they were going to strike at the royal family on the day of the tragedy at the station. The death of King Edward was the perfect chance to turn the whole system upside down, and yet it was time for the leader to make his move. Years passed. However, Kieran captured him, assuming that the rebellion would never happen. So how about telling them the real purpose of these machinations? The guy told them to hurry up, because they didn't have time for his hateful little speeches. Our heroine was clicking her heels at this time. She whispered and screamed, saying that this part was true. He lied in another place. Kieran was puzzled and ordered her to stop yelling, asking what kind of nonsense she was talking about. Lauren, in turn, said that he didn't need to signal her, and Harry lied to them about the identity of the apostle. The guy screamed in bewilderment and waved his hands, saying that she could have said that from the very beginning. Lauren was now completely shocked, because she did just that, and it was definitely not her fault that he was blind. As a result, the guys literally stood and silently yelled at each other, waving their hands. Their hostage was completely bewildered because the kidnappers suddenly fell silent, and only the breeze blew in his direction. Lauren sighed heavily anyway, figuring they'd have to come up with a better way for next time. At that moment, she extended her hand, asking to give her the notebook, which contained various data. Kieran understood at least this, so nodding his head, he soon handed over the notebook. Soon the boy turned to Harry again, saying that he doubted that anyone had met the apostle, but he was quite sure that he already knew who had met him. The most unpleasant thing was that time was running out, because the police were already running to the address. Lauren leafed through the book, and Kieran continued to assume that the seventh was smart enough not to leave a paper trail behind him. The guy also suggested that the apostle must have sent his personal messenger. Our heroine was listening to the interrogation and leafing through her notebook at the time, and yet, after just a few moments, her face changed to one of incredible shock, causing her hands to shake. There was real fear in the girl's eyes, and in her hand was a certain letter that she had found. At this point, the captain was telling everyone that he wanted at least 2 officers posted at every exit of the building. They wouldn't let Loon escape. And yet, let's go back a little. Kieran, perplexed, asked Harry if he had swallowed his tongue, but if he wanted, he could express himself with gestures. However, there was no reaction, and it was really sad. The guy suddenly said that it was much more convenient to speak in sign language when all the fingers were in place. Harry continued to hold on with all his might, not even thinking about telling how everything was really happening. Kieran sighed heavily and said that if it was necessary, then he would have to do it. At the same moment, he stuck the fork, just like the knife, between the hostage's fingers. Yet he could no longer restrain himself, so he began to speak about how the apostles never show themselves. An anonymous messenger gives them instructions, and they are the eyes, ears, and voices of the apostle. He tried to chase one once, but they literally disappear and reappear at will. He lost it. Lauren was still leafing through her notebook at the time. Kieran said it was all very interesting, but what about the accomplices? McTrevor may have been neutralized, but he had heard that a certain Ryan Flemings was still around. The guy asked where he was and who the others were. Harry replied that he couldn't say for sure, because they got the weapons abroad on the black market. So here he is dealing with one of their main suppliers on behalf of the apostle. As for the rest, he was dealing with those 2, and a woman named Beatrice Blakesley. Lauren kept an eye on the progress of the investigation from time to time, and Kieran was both pleased and not so pleased. At that moment, our heroine decided that there was nothing interesting in this book after all. Just when she was about to give up on this matter, the girl, to her shock, discovered something interesting. She snatched the letter abruptly, which left her in such shock that she simply could not move from the spot. At this time, the police finally reached the desired location and burst in, disrupting the entire holiday. The police asked residents to step aside. The captain suddenly shouted that they were looking for Harry Anslow, and if they had information, they should come forward and the rest should step aside. Of course, all that noise and rumble is hard to miss, so Kieran immediately pointed it out, saying that they were just in time. He suddenly turned to Harry and said that they appreciated his cooperation, but strongly recommended that he continue in the same spirit with the police if he wanted a painless trip to prison. At this time, our heroine stood in the same stupor, from which she could not come out. Her breathing was too abrupt. Kieran looked at his partner in surprise at this point and said that they needed to go. However, the girl did not listen to her friend and suddenly ran up to him, tearing off his mask. Putting the photo to Harry's face, the girl asked in bewilderment what connected him with him and how he knew him. At this time, some kind of nightmare was happening in the hall, because the police began to smash and check everything. Our heroine, one way or another, told us not to get distracted by other trifles and to answer her. The guy looked at this photo and then at the girl, and literally couldn't understand what was happening. Kieran urged his partner on, telling her that now was not the best time. But the girl continued to scream and ask what she had just asked anyway. She wanted to know how he knew him. Meanwhile, the police had already searched almost all the rooms. In the second to last one, they found a loving couple. And this only meant that there was only one storeroom left, which they had not yet examined. Kieran looked tensely towards the door and said that they needed to leave right now. Our heroine continued to try to get information, but Harry, perplexed, asked her who she was. At this time, there were already people at the door who were about to go inside. Kieran could never allow that to happen, which made him nervous, knowing that they should be somewhere else by now. He also understood that Lauren would not leave so easily, so he knocked out the hostage and grabbed the girl, running towards the exit. The girl screamed and asked to let her go, while heavily clutching what she had found. Shortly after our heroes escaped the crime scene, the police burst into the storeroom. They immediately noticed Harry, but Loon was not there, and judging by the open window, they realized that they had gone out there. Detective Oliver, one way or another, first of all ran to the window to look out from there. Of course, from here, only the night city was visible, and nothing more, which only meant that they had missed the criminals. At this time, the purple hyacinth was jumping across the rooftops, going as far as possible and to a quieter place. After a while, the guy landed in a quiet alley. It was a rainy night. Soon he literally threw Lauren, who straightened up and leaned against the wall. In turn, Kieran was perplexed by what had just happened, so he tore off his mask and ordered an explanation. Looking at the girl, he asked in bewilderment if she had really gone crazy to do such stupid things. However, the girl did not respond at all, which was undoubtedly a little frightening. And still, Kieran wasn't going to show sympathy. Still in the same bewilderment, he screamed. Soon he grabbed her and pinned her against the wall, ordering Lauren to look straight into his eyes. He asked to answer whether this had anything to do with their common cause, or whether what had happened was just empty chatter. If she really wanted to just ruin everything, then… At that moment, the guy just fell silent. In front of him, he saw Lauren's extremely cold-blooded and indifferent gaze, which he had never seen before. The girl looked away and asked him to leave her alone with his questions. One way or another, he asked her to tell him what happened there and what she managed to see. And again, with her indifferent look, she repeated for him to get away from her. Looking at her, he realized that he didn't really want to argue with her, assuming that she should sort things out for herself. Anyway, he stepped back and advised her to warn him in advance the next time she decided to go crazy. Turning around, he added that this way he could kill her before she destroyed them both. Soon after, a frustrated Kieran began to leave the alleyway, heading towards home to rest. At this time, our heroine, sighing heavily, leaned against the wall and began to slide down. The girl was heavily squeezing the paper that was in her hand, and what happened was not just out of nowhere. And still the girl understood that what happened could have been avoided, but memories took over again. After some time, the action takes us to the Sinclair house, where our heroine has already returned. At this time, she stood in front of the board, assuming that she had stumbled upon the key detail today. Running her hands over the entire board, she was sure of it, but she didn't even know what it meant. And yet, time after time, she told herself that she was sure it was him. Just at that moment, the door creaked, and then Uncle Sinclair appeared. The man looked around in bewilderment and told his niece that it was already late, so she should rest. Our heroine nodded her head, telling her uncle that he was right, and she didn't even notice that it was already so late. At that moment, Tristan came closer and, putting his hand on the girl's shoulder, asked if she was okay. Lauren replied that they had had a hectic day at work, and she thought she was still on adrenaline since she got back. And yet she asked not to worry, saying that she would soon go to bed. But Uncle doubted that she would fall asleep standing in the middle of the office and reflecting on the past. Tristan assumed that she was still obsessed with that boy. Lauren was holding back her tears at that moment. She realized that she had been told to just turn the page so often that it had become almost shameful for her to admit it. Tristan approached his niece, sympathizing with her, but reminding her that 10 years had passed. Our heroine herself understood that she was still stuck on the same chapter in her life. Her uncle was constantly worried about her, but she, in turn, could do nothing about it. At the same time, she could not overcome herself either physically or morally. Tristan suddenly said that she needed to get rid of this stupid board. And what's more, turning it around, he said that she should have done this long ago. He would have gotten rid of it himself, but he couldn't do it for her. She herself would have to find the strength to move on. Tristan reminded her that the boy was dead. So many years had passed, and none of her constant searches had found a single sign that he was alive. It couldn't be otherwise. The man asked in surprise how much more time she would waste chasing the corpse. Our heroine sighed heavily, saying that she knew all this, but she still thought about it sometimes. But still, she could understand that it all led to nowhere. And yet, she asked him to stop worrying so much, because she was fine, and he should go to bed too, and she would do the same. Sighing heavily, the man decided that there was no way he could contradict her. All that was left was to stroke her head and wish her good night and sweet dreams. A few moments later, our heroine was left alone in the room, alone with her obsessive thoughts. A bunch of thoughts ran through her head, but still, she suddenly needed the photo that she constantly squeezed. After that, she found a special place for him, realizing that she had realized something during the night. Our heroine missed important details, things she previously thought were true about the past, but were not. Remembering that very day when the girl screamed trying to make herself heard, but people only tried to calm her down. All the girl knew for sure was that he definitely deserved justice, and whatever Lauren came up with, she needed to know who did this to him. The photo was dated November 13th. Looking closely at the picture, You could see a photo of the same guy from the interrogation, and in the reflection were the markings of the Allendale station. The action moves to the forest, where our heroine was completely alone, but at the same time it was even comfortable and calm. After just a few moments, it wasn't so quiet here, because a certain voice echoed and called her. The girl raised her head and noticed a boy in front of her who was talking in bewilderment about how she was super slow. However, at that very moment, the girl smiled happily, because she was glad to see him. The girl asked in bewilderment why he was hiding, and moreover, where he was, and where it was. The guy started laughing and saying that he didn't know anything, and that it wasn't happening to him now. Our heroine somehow sensed the lie, so she said outright that he was a liar, because she knew he had it. The guy started running away, saying that if she wanted it, she had to catch up with him first. Naturally, he decided to clarify that she should at least try to catch up with him. They were really happy. They laughed and ran away from each other, but at some point the forest just ended. The girl tried to grab the boy's hand and was a moment away from success, but a moment later, her hand simply waved in the air, and it was already dawn outside. That's right, our heroine woke up in her bed, and everything that happened was just a normal dream. Looking at her hand, Lauren knew only one thing clearly. She didn't hate happy dreams. The problem was that they always reminded her of something she could never experience again. One way or another, the action moves outside. Today, it was quite cool and even snowing. Our heroine was on patrol, but instead of analyzing her surroundings, she was thinking about the fact that 3 days had already passed and nothing had been heard from Kieran. Of course, she didn't dare to return to the cave either, and this is not surprising, considering the fact that they were practically caught due to their own fault. Anslow had certainly heard her voice and seen part of her face, but it was a miracle that he did not remember her. Detective March reported to the captain that Harry had been hit in the head several times, had lost consciousness a couple of times, and was also experiencing mild memory loss. What's more surprising is that the guy doesn't remember how he ended up in that room, let alone what happened before he passed out the second time. Thus, the detective led to the fact that all Anslow can remember is how the man interrogated him. Our heroine assumed that she would just continue the investigation herself. As always, it would probably be better that way. She had already risked her neck enough by hanging out with this killer. And besides, she needed to find a way to get to Anslow, because she had to ask him about that photo. Only he could answer her questions. Lucas, meanwhile, walked along and complained about how the weather had decided to hit them this year. Our heroine wanted to say something, but at that moment she heard a strange noise nearby. Literally raising their heads, they noticed an unknown girl running out of the alley in a mask. An awkward situation soon occurred in which all the police officers stared at the criminal in bewilderment. The girl realized that the situation was not the most pleasant, but she still decided to grab the blade. Of course, at that very second, all the policemen took out their revolvers and pointed them towards the girl. She was initially very nervous, but soon decided that the best option would be to run away from there as quickly as possible. The lieutenant turned around and said that he and Officer Sinclair would go after her, and the patrol was now under Kim's command. They would catch up with them as soon as they finished with the criminal. As soon as the orders were given, the boys immediately went after the criminal. At this time, there was one strange and secretive guy in the crowd who clearly stood out from everyone else. Suddenly, he took out his camera and pointed it towards the police officers who ran past. The amazing thing was that he eventually managed to take a picture that captured the Sinclair officer in all his glory. Meanwhile, the guys continued to pursue the girl, but soon looked at each other and nodded. At the same moment, our heroine deftly jumped onto the roof and now continued her pursuit from there. In turn, the lieutenant used classical methods and continued to advance on the ground. One way or another, after a couple of moments, our heroine landed right in front of the criminal, causing her to brake sharply. The girl wanted to run back, but as soon as she turned her head, she noticed a lieutenant behind her who pointed a gun at her. The man immediately advised her to give in, and then they would resolve everything peacefully. Our heroine also joined the conversation, saying that the entire squad of police officers saw her doing this, so there was no point in running away. The lieutenant told the frightened girl that she had the right to remain silent. He soon nodded his head and added that anything she said could and would be used against her in court. However, the main thing was the lieutenant's nod, which our heroine noticed and nodded in response. A moment later, the girl rushed towards the criminal, saying that she had the right to a lawyer. The lieutenant also rushed from the spot, saying that if she couldn't pay for the services of a lawyer. At this point, our heroine had already successfully managed to disarm the criminal, and Will, as in his youth, ran after her and did his part of the job. A moment later, he put handcuffs on the girl. Pointing the gun at the criminal, she finished the sentence about a lawyer. She would be provided with a state attorney in the interrogation room. In the past, when they went through a team competition, everyone literally rejoiced at their cohesion. They both passed the physical fitness test. One way or another, at that moment, our heroine looked at the bag filled with precious stones. Lauren immediately smiled and told the girl that she had exquisite taste in jewelry, but her shoplifting skills lacked elegance. Soon the lieutenant turned on the radio and transmitted that they were at the intersection of Delph and St. Isidore Streets. Hawks said the suspect was in custody and asked for, but at that very moment, the girl screamed, saying that this was all for her mother. She knew that she had done wrong. However, her mother is sick, and she needs money to pay for her treatment. At first, the lieutenant was a little distracted, but when he came to his senses, he still asked to send them a car. Soon after, he ended the call and hung his head heavily, as if feeling guilty. But our heroine suddenly said that even if it was for a great cause, stealing was still illegal. She hadn't hurt anyone, so she'd get off with a regular fine. Still, she's useful to her mother when she's not behind bars. So next time, you might want to think twice before robbing a jewelry store in broad daylight. After some time, the police car ordered by the lieutenant arrived. Now, all that was left was to fill out a report on what had happened and hand over the criminal. A few moments later, the guys were free, and our heroine, smiling happily, suggested hurrying up before Kim took over the entire city. The boy laughed, then became horrified, thinking that she would start hunting watermelons instead of leading the patrol. The boys started laughing in unison as an unknown silhouette followed them. At that moment, our heroine turned to Will and said that she knew that he didn't like to share his problems. But still, she noticed that something had been bothering him lately and wanted to know if there was anything she could help him with. Hawks thought for a moment and soon thanked Lauren. He didn't want to lie and say that everything was fine. He smiled and said that she knew perfectly well that everything would work out, so she didn't have to worry, he would cope. Hearing these words, seeing this smile, our heroine understood that although he never lies, but still, Lauren looked away and dared to suggest that his mother was the cause of it all. Still smiling, he said that, among other things, it really was her. And yet, turning his head away, he began to apologize. But Lauren put her hand on his shoulder and said that she knew everything. The girl smiled, looking at him, and said that everything was fine. If he didn't want to talk about it, then she understood, so it wasn't worth it. Still, she suggested that they should go out for a few days to unwind. At the very least, it would take his mind off things. The guy sighed and said that it was a great idea, and he was sure that she could use some time off too. She was a recidivist workaholic after all. The girl laughed and said that in that case, they would have to wear masks. Otherwise, the women at the station would try to burn her at the stake for it. Hawks immediately started laughing, saying that in that case, he would be worried about them, not about her. Our heroine really enjoyed communicating with William, who was always calm and kind. And yet, Lauren wondered when he would finally be able to let his walls down. He held them for too long. Literally, from the very beginning of their acquaintance, he showed himself as a strong man. As a teenager, when he had problems, he also smiled and said that he could handle it. And to this day, he kept that smile on his face, pretending that everything was fine and that he would do everything himself. Our heroine knew for sure that he needed to destroy these walls, and then he would feel better. But if he can't do this, then these walls will simply break him, and then there will be no way back. One way or another, after some time, the guys returned to their squad. Kim, who was eating her favorite watermelon, suddenly threw it away and ran to hug Lauren, literally hitting William with her hand as she ran with the hug. And yet, soon after the reunion, the guys went on to patrol the city. Our heroine was the last one walking, which made her seem like she was running into something. This is exactly what happened when she was suddenly snatched right out of the column. It is not difficult to guess that this person was Kieran, who nevertheless showed up. The guy said in a calm voice that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and he hoped that she missed him. However, the girl pushed him away sharply and asked in surprise what he wanted. The guy replied that their short break had given him enough time to think. Should he just get rid of her or try to find out why she was angry with him? Lauren looked at him, deciding to ask what he had decided. Kieran replied that it was obvious that she was still alive, and his curiosity seemed to get the better of him this time. They eventually made a pact not to kill each other, and she was lucky he was a man of his word. So he asked the officer again what she had seen in Anslow's diary. Our heroine turned away at that moment, saying that it was definitely none of his business. Literally, at that very second, an interesting situation happened, where Kieran took out a blade and grabbed one of the girl's hands, and she in turn took out a revolver and put it to Kieran's head. He said that it was literally his business, because they were partners, and it was part of the investigation. There were things he needed to know before she blurted them out during questioning, but Lauren replied that there were a lot of things they didn't know about each other, but they agreed that there were no personal questions. In turn, Kieran replied that it was not a personal question. It was about a piece of evidence he found during their mission, and yet the girl insisted that it was personal. She checked, and there was nothing relevant to the case. Kieran added that they may have made a rule not to kill each other, but no one said anything about injuries. With a heavy sigh, the girl decided that there was no point in arguing with the killer, so she decided to tell. Before she was transferred to the patrol division, she was a detective and had been working towards this for a long time. However, a year ago, she worked on a case that got her kicked out of the investigation department, and that was it. The guy laughed and said that even though he didn't have her lie detector, she had deceived him. It wasn't enough to piss someone like her off, which meant there was something else going on. And again, the girl sighed heavily, realizing that she couldn't hide anything from him, so she lowered the revolver and told him everything. He asked her, and she answered. She saw the photo, but didn't think Anslow would have it, which took her by surprise. That's all Kieran needs to know. She just lost control and put them in danger. She knew it, and she's truly sorry. The girl assured her partner that he didn't need to worry about Anslow, because he didn't remember anything. The blow that Kieran had dealt him certainly took care of that. The purple hyacinth was glad that she had courage, and he liked it, because only fools ever dared to challenge him. Still, Kieran promised that if things went downhill next time because of her, he would simply destroy her. Lauren assured him that what happened that night in Golden Clover would never happen again. Just at that very moment, Kim wanted to ask something, and only discovered that Lauren was not there. Kieran finally told Lauren that he, unlike her, had not been wasting his time, but had been studying Beatrice. They would start preparing tonight and visit her on Thursday. Finally turning around, the guy said that she knew what they should do, after which he left. And our heroine soon returned to her squad. Kim was definitely surprised where Lauren had disappeared to, but was glad that she had returned. Soon the action takes us to the night, to those same not very pleasant areas. Meanwhile, the boys questioned Beatrice, apologizing for disturbing her at such a late hour, but she could go back to sleep or wait for the police to arrive. The guy wanted to say that the police would be here any minute, but at that very moment, the thugs who had come to see my lady burst into the room. The girl laughed and said that they were late, and it was stupid if they didn't think that she wouldn't be prepared. Her partners had been dropping like flies for a couple of days, but she wasn't as careless as they were. At that very moment, the boys jumped out the window, realizing that now was the time to leave. Of course, Blakesley had no intention of letting Loon go, so she ordered her men to follow them and catch everyone. But she didn't take one thing into account. The girl was left alone in the middle of the room, still tied up. All the boys were already running after Loon, so they simply didn't hear the cries for the fools to come back and untie her. The most unpleasant thing is that Beatrice's hired killers were on our hero's tail. Soon one of them pulled out a blade, but Kieran reacted in time, and soon a confrontation began. Of course, they weren't going to leave our heroine without attention. A guy was already flying towards her, throwing blades at her. Nevertheless, she deftly dodged, hit him on the head, and threw him forward. Soon our heroes stood back to back as the killers surrounded them. Quite timely. The guy suddenly laughed and said that he thought he would miss his training, but these amateurs were a godsend. At that very moment, our heroes began to fight with their opponents, fighting for their lives. While Kieran was fighting one guy, our heroine was dodging and fighting another one. Having blocked a rather unpleasant blow, the girl took out her pistol to deal with the killer more quickly. However, the guy pushed her, causing her to end up right on the slope of the roof. But soon after, a blade rose above her, which would soon touch her and end her life. But what was planned was not destined to happen, because at that very second, the killer's head simply flew off his shoulders. Blood splattered everywhere, and most of it, of course, landed on Lauren's face. The one who saved our heroine stood over the corpse of this killer. The guy's blade was completely covered in blood. Our heroine looked around and tried to come to her senses, dispelling the thought that all this was real. At that moment, she raised her head and looked into the eyes of the purple hyacinth, who had finally revealed himself in all his glory. In any case, it was not yet time to relax, because at that very moment, one of the killers began to rise to his feet. The guy tried to attack from behind, but Kieran dodged without much difficulty. Soon after, he turned around and counterattacked the killer by hitting him on the head, and only now could he breathe a sigh of relief. So the guy turned around and asked Lauren if she was okay. Our heroine, although she was in incredible shock from what was happening, nodded her head. The purple hyacinth was glad to hear this and suggested going somewhere safer anyway. Still, the girl decided to analyze what had happened, and something cleared up in her head when she realized that some of the guys were still alive. But she also looked at the guy, of whom only his torso, legs, and arms remained. She remembered that he had assured her that he only killed when he was ordered to, or when it was the only way out. And he said that if next time something goes wrong, he will just get rid of her, but at that moment, he went against his principles and saved Lauren. Why did that happen? Of course, after some time, our heroes returned to the Purple Hyacinth Cave. Now was the time to change clothes and tidy up after such a night. At that moment, our heroine turned around and noticed Kieran, who was literally covered in scars, bruises, and cuts. And yet, since he was already accustomed to coping alone, he began to bandage himself. Our heroine really wanted to help him, which is why she went to him, asking him to let her help, but the guy moved a little further and said that he could handle everything on his own. But Lauren assured him that he looked stupid and that she would help him bandage himself. Taking matters into her own hands, she decided to initially remove the entire bandage, which he simply decided to throw on. The first thing the girl decided to do was to treat all the wounds, because blood poisoning is no joke. Soon after all the wounds were treated, she set about bandaging him. The guy tried to find out if she needed any help, to which she asked him to stand still and not move. And now, finally, the last stage, when the girl tore off a piece of the bandage and everything was almost finished. With everything properly tucked and straightened, Lauren said she was proud of herself and added that everything was ready. And yet, literally a moment later, the girl's face changed and she turned to Kieran. With trembling hands, the girl began to whisper something that was impossible to even make out. Naturally, the guy turned around in bewilderment and asked what she was even talking about.